Hello, welcome to Axiom Curb on the 28th of November 2015. We're doing a live special talk with Albert Burgess from the English Constitution Group. He's kindly brought us some new information. Well, it's new to myself, so for those that are keen to listen to what Albert does best, I'm sure you're going to be very interested to hear with the next hour to an hour, to 2 hours, depending on how long we've got with Albert. So I'd just like to welcome Albert to the talk. Hello, Albert.
Hello there.
How you doing? You all right?
I'm fine, apart from the fact I keep coughing.
Is that worse than the knee that you've got at the minute?
Well, the knee I had done a year ago, almost exactly a year ago. I had it done on the 30th of November. The knee works fine, but unfortunately my foot, I don't think it's something to do with the circulation. I don't know what the hell they've done with it, but my foot is constantly cold.
Well,
Um,
as I got a bit of advice from Stav, who's also joined with us tonight. He recommended me to have a bit of sea salt. So
yeah,
I've been chucking sea salt down neck, and hopefully that seems to be
have you?
helping. Yeah, apparently that's good for your circulation, but it's a trial thing at the minute.
Yeah, yeah. Well, there's lots of stuff out there that's natural remedies that actually do work. I mean, I actually, a long time ago now, about 40 years ago, with my first wife, we had a retarded child. He had a condition called the DeLange syndrome, which nobody knew a lot about 40 years ago. And one of the doctors said to me, "Are you interested in it?" Which really is a damn fool question to say to a parent who's got a retarded child. You don't have a choice, do you? You've got to be interested. And he recommended a book by a Dr. Joseph Berg, which correlated all of the research done on these children since the first one was identified in 1916, and there had only been 250 since 1916 until 40 years ago. It shows how rare it was. I wish I got that lucky on the lottery. Um, but so I've stuck with a condition that nobody really knew a lot about, and a need to know. So I went and saw my dad, who'd been a nurse in the RAF, and said, "Dad, lend me some books." And he gave me a load of medical books, none of which were any good because they told me how to, look after wounds from bullets and shrapnel and burning and stuff like that, but nothing that was of interest to me. And as I was going out the door, he said, "Here, you want this?" And I said, "No, I don't want that." He gave me a book called J.I. Rodell's Health Treasury. And something said to me, "You want that?" And I carried it round in my pocket for a week. Got to work, had nothing to read whatsoever, and I thought, I've got that book in my pocket, and I picked it up and I opened it at random, just like this, opened it at random, and it was as if the top of the page was radiating gold light on the left-hand page. And it was a test they'd run on some rats in America where they'd removed vitamin E from their diet and completely screened it out. And they went through an exact sequence of events prior to death that the children with the DeLange were going through. So according to this book. So I thought, well, you've got to start somewhere. And the book said that there were 7 maternal ill health problems common to the condition, one of which was viral infection, so forget that because anybody could get the flu. So I spoke to the Ministry of Health main reference library, a very nice man called Mr. Bennett. And I explained my problem to him, and I wanted to know all there was to know about these maternal ill health problems and nutrition. And he gave me a list of books, and I actually read all these books. And it's amazing how quickly, when you've got a need to do it, you can learn to scan books. And I scanned through all these books, making copious notes. Then went back to him a week later and said, "Look, I've read all them, but I now need these. Have you got them?" And he said yes. And we worked out an excellent situation. I would tell him what I wanted. He would parcel it all up and send it to my local library, and I would draw them on loan from my local library because I wasn't allowed to draw them because I wasn't in the medical profession from the Ministry of Health main reference library. We've got the same books from the Ministry of Health reference library, but you know what it's like. It's empire building, isn't it? All these people want to build empires. And in no time at all, I had found out that every single Out of the 7 maternal ill health problems, one of them was viral infection, so forget that. But the other 6 responded very, very well to vitamin E therapy. So I then went to see the hospital and said, look, I believe that this is due to a deficiency of vitamin E in his diet prior to conception, or in our diet prior to conception, which has caused this problem. I'd like you to give him massive amounts of vitamin E, because whilst he's operating on his mother's hormones, he's still growing effectively, and maybe, just maybe, his own body will cure itself if we get the right stuff into it. DeLange syndrome is a bit like Down syndrome in its IQ and growth rates and everything else. And I had a hell of a row with a doctor, a consultant, because he didn't want to do anything, and he went home, and I went back the following day, and the ward sister saw me and said, oh, Mr. Burgess, I've got a message from you from Dr. Cox, the consultant. And I said, oh yeah, you know, what does he want? He wants me to get him out of the hospital. And because he'd already told me that, and she said no. He went home last night. He couldn't sleep because he kept thinking about what you'd said to him, because I'd given him, he said I wouldn't understand the genetics and all that, so I gave him a thumbnail 5-minute sketch on genetics and said, now tell me I wouldn't understand it. And she said he went home, and he'd been, at 3 o'clock this morning, he got up, he couldn't sleep, he's been in the hospital library all night long, and he's going to give it a try. And they put him on Abidec, 5 ml of Abidec a day, which is a multivitamin, plus 5 ml of wheat germ oil, which is vitamin E. Within 4 weeks of going on the treatment, he had in fact attained an above average rate of growth for a normal baby, where they've never since 1916 made one grow. And in fact, he had, from not answering a single reflex test, and I said, I will make you move, you bastard, and I put a bloody match to his foot and he didn't move. He then answered all of the standard reflex tests. So apart from the fact that he would grip your fingers, as they do, and as you lifted him up, he would come up so far off the bed, and then he would let go, because he didn't have very big hands and he couldn't get a good grip on your fingers. So, but he answered all of the standard reflex tests. He held on as long as he could. So after a month he stopped growing. So I said to the doctor, well, it's either one of two things. One, what we've just done has made no influence whatsoever on him, or B, he's now grown and we need to increase the dosage. And the doctor said, well, that comes under the heading of experimenting on children, and we can't do that, not allowed. And I said, well, if you don't know what causes this condition and you don't know how to treat it, and you can't induce it in animals to cause it, so you can learn how to treat it, how are you going to ever get a cure if you don't use the children you've got with it? And he said, well, I can't do it. He said, the press would crucify me. I said, all right, well, I'll call a press conference, tell them it's my baby, you're doing what I bloody well told you. And eventually we increased the dosage, and he was off growing again. By the age of 18 months, he was feeding himself with a spoon, normally, without getting it everywhere. I took him to Harperbury Hospital at Radlett, where they had a 12-year-old West Indian laddie with the same condition, and they were absolutely ecstatic because he was the first delaying child ever to feed itself, and they'd had 10 of them. And so I said to the sister, well, I'd like to see that. And so they brought in a bowl of stew, which they put on the table, and Trevor walked up to the bowl of stew, whacks his hand into the stew, puts it in his mouth, the stew all over the table, all over the floor, all over Trevor, and they were ecstatic at that. And I said to her, well, can you get me a bowl of that, please, sister? And she got a bowl, I said, and something to drink, and she brought a drink in a feeder cup. And I took the top off the feeder cup and put it on the table and sat him in a high chair, and she brought him a bib. I said, no, we don't need the bib. And sat him in the high chair, moved it up to the table, and he looked at the stew and he looked at the spoon by the side of the table, and he picked up the spoon, he dipped it in the stew, and he fed himself, and it didn't go everywhere. And then he put the spoon down and he reached out and he picked up the glass of the plastic feeder cup in both hands, because he had very small hands, and he picked it up and he drank out of it, and it didn't go anywhere other than down his mouth. And the people at Harperbury Hospital were absolutely gobsmacked, and they examined him properly, and the consultant there said to me, he said, "I understand you want him admitted here." And I said, "No, it's the last place I want him admitted. This is a mental hospital." And he said, "Well, why is he here?" And I said, "Well, on the basis that you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours, you've got a 12-year-old called Trevor here that I wanted to meet. I've now met him. And you can examine my son, who's got a very rare condition that you're interested in." So they examined him and properly examined him, and they said to me, "Well, the only reason we would consider taking him is because if he had no surviving relatives and nowhere else to go." But he said, because he is not mentally retarded. Now, this is a condition where every one of them since 1916 has had an IQ of around about 50%. And he's not mentally retarded. He thought the Flintstones were absolutely fantastic. As soon as he heard the theme song coming on for the Flintstones, he was off round the ward, sat in front of the telly and watching the Flintstones, and he loved them. We had all sorts of gadgets. We made him to do different things, and he was doing extremely well. The only thing was he didn't talk, and according to the doctors, the reason for that was because when he was first born, he was immediately put in an incubator, and he lived for the first 2 weeks in an incubator. Then he was put in a side ward all on his own, so he had no sounds to relate to. So I had a brand new baby daughter, Gillian, who was at home, and so we recorded her making all her baby gurgling noises and crying and all sorts of stuff, and then we took that to the hospital with a record player and a speaker, with a video, a cassette player and a speaker, and we put the speaker under his pillow, and at night time the nurses would come along and switch on the tape and all the baby noises, because we were trying sleep learning, see if we could put it onto his head, sleep learning. Unfortunately, the hospital and I, with the doctors, mainly spent most of our time fighting, on the basis that they were the doctors and they thought they should decide what was going on. And I'm saying, no, it's my son, do what you bloody well told. And so they came along and they said to me, "Well, we're stopping his treatment." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Well, because it's causing him to have cancer." And I said, "I want three copies of your report." And they said, "What for?" And so I said to them, "Well, I want one from me to sit down with a medical dictionary, one from my GP, and one from a consultant from another group of hospitals." And they said, "Why do you want that?" I said, "Well, if you're lying to me, I'll find out." I didn't get my report. They didn't stop his treatment. What they did was they put a child in the bed next to him who had measles, and he caught the measles. And because I had a young baby at home, and measles is very dangerous for young children, I didn't go down for a week. I got a phone call at work saying to me from the ward sister, telling me that he was very, very weak, very, very ill, and that her nurses were mutinying. And I said, "What are you talking about? Nurses don't mutiny." And she said, "Well, mine are. He's been, ever since you were in here last, he's been on glucose and water." And so my nurses have said he needs to be fed, and they've said they're going to feed him at a 3 o'clock feed. And she said, because I can't allow my nurses to do something I haven't told them to do, I've told my staff nurse that she is to feed him at 3 o'clock. And because I'm overriding the doctors, my career has gone down the tubes. So by 3:15, I shall be out of a job. And I said, "No, you won't, sister. I am telling you to feed him. I will be there as soon as I can." And I left work then, jumped on a motorcycle. I had a Jawa 350 at the time. I rode the bloody thing all the way from Felton and Middlesex to Paddington Green Children's Hospital. Full throttle all the way, spent most of my time on the pavement, never stopped for a red light. Got there, got into the ward just before feeding time, and he was in my arms, on my lap, and I was spoon feeding him some Lucozade, and the social worker came in and said to me, do you think that's too gassy for him? And I said, well, they reckon it's good for the dead and the dying. And he opened his eyes, looked at me, smiled, and died. And he died because the hospital starved him to death. And but as a result, I became extremely interested in genetics and all sorts of other stuff. And I was on holiday at Butler in South Coast World when it was 110 in the shade, and it was at the time Chernobyl went off and you weren't allowed to walk on the grass. And there was a woman there in her 40s with her son. He was playing with my kids, and she was in fact wearing a big overcoat, balaclava helmet, thick woolen gloves, thick woolen tights. And I said to her in the bar at night, if you don't mind my asking a stupid question, why the hell are you dressed like this? And she said, because I've got very bad eczema all over my body, and if I get sunlight anywhere near it, it's murder. And the only stuff I can wear next to my skin is, in fact, wool. So I have to knit all my own underwear. So I thought, well, that's a bit rough. And I sat there with me rum and coke, and I gave it a thought, with my genetics hat on. And I decided that what had probably happening was that a chemical reaction was taking place all over her body called lipid peroxidation of polyunsaturated fatty acids. And that this was releasing a free radical, which was bombing around the cell until it impacted, like all bullets, when it hits a wall, it chips a lump out. And it's chipped a lump out the cell, and the particular part of the cell that it chipped a lump out was called the lysosomal subcellular particle, which is a little bag of acids. And like acid the world over, it's okay as long as it's in the bottle. But once you drop it on the floor, if you happen to be standing there, you lose your feet. So I worked out that what was happening is this chemical reaction was taking place, and the way to stop it was to actually do two things. Firstly, live in the shower to wash off any surface acid, and secondly, to take the thing that prevented the chemical reaction, called lipid peroxidation of polyunsaturated fatty acids, which is vitamin E. So I told her to invest in a bottle of vitamin E and live in the shower. And 6 months later, I got a letter from her, because I'd asked her to let me know what happened. And she told me she'd just come from her GP. There wasn't a trace of eczema anywhere on her body, and that she had never felt so fit in her life. And if I ever found myself in Hereford, I could feel free to use her body any time I wanted. And I showed the letter to my wife, and I have to say I've never seen it since. So I don't know where in Hereford I'm supposed to go. Not that I would have gone, but anyway. So basically, that sort of sorted me on the thing. Now I told them at Guy's at Great Ormond Street at Denmark. My son was born in the October. On the end of November, I told them at Guy's, Great Ormond Street, Denmark Hill, King's College at Denmark Hill, St Mary's at Braid Street, the Royal Free at Hampstead, and St Bartholomew's, that there was a dietary deficiency of vitamin E in this country. And I was told by all of them, absolute rubbish. In fact, Guy's, Dr. Singer at Guy's, told me that you could live on Wimpy and chips and not be deficient of vitamin E. In the January, the Lancet published a medical survey of the diet saying that there was a dietary deficiency of vitamin E in England. And so I photocopied it and I sent it to all these consultants at all these hospitals and said, next time, don't bloody argue. But the problem is that we have a major problem with regard to nutrition, and that is that vitamin E is fat soluble. Now, it's essential. If you're going to have children, it's absolutely essential. If you're going to prevent young children having the most common disease at the moment, which is asthma, you've got to have vitamin E. I was registered disabled with asthma. And whilst I was doing my research for my son, I came across a research report by two doctors in University of Arkansas in America called Smith and Warren. And they, in fact, had 32 children given to them. They were both top American chest specialists. They were told, we got 32 kids here who don't respond to any known treatment for asthma. Money is no object, but next year you're putting a paper out at a symposium. And they'd done everything they could think of, and nothing had worked. And they said, well, all we can do is go there and say, we don't know. And then one of them said to the other one, he said, well, I suppose some bright spark's going to ask us if we've measured the vitamin and mineral levels in the blood, so we better do it. And they did. And they found all 32 children deficient in vitamin E, vitamin C, and 1 or 2 minerals. So, being good doctors, they gave them to them. Lo and behold, all 32 children lost their asthma. So they thought, well, it can't be that simple. It can't. So they screened the vitamins and minerals out of their diet again until the blood levels got back to where they were, and all 32 children had asthma that didn't respond to any known treatment. So they gave them back the vitamin E, the asthma went, and I went and saw a tame chemist. Now, at the time I was 32, I was registered disabled, had been from birth with asthma and bronchitis, which I'm told I got through being stuck on Kilburn Park Underground Station all night long while the bombers and the V1s and stuff were coming over. And so I went and saw a tame chemist that I knew, and I said, what's good for these vitamin and minerals? And he said, a bottle of wheat germ oil. So I asked, well, give us a bottle. Within 4 weeks of taking it, my asthma had gone completely. And it never came back. I was able to pass the exam, physical exam, for joining the police force. And whilst I was in the police force, I chased a 21-year-old right up to the 16th floor of a block of flats, straight up, stayed behind him all the way, close behind him all the way, and by the 16th floor I was pretty shagged, but then I was over 40 at the time, and I said to my 19-year-old colleague, get him, and he caught him on the 21st floor. So, you know, I should never have been able to do that, being registered disabled with asthma. So there is this dietary deficiency of vitamin E in the country. Now, the reason there is a dietary deficiency of vitamin E is it's fat soluble. So if you are in business and you are producing cornflakes, for example, say you're Mr. Kellogg and you're producing cornflakes, you don't want to throw away your warehouse full of cornflakes every 28 days, because being a fat soluble vitamin, it goes rancid after 28 days. So you don't want to throw away all your warehouse full of cornflakes, so you remove all of the vitamin E from the thing. Now, anybody that's making any food that is wheat-based does exactly the same thing. So if you take Weetabix, which is very well loaded with vitamins, and you take the trouble to look at the side where it tells you what's in it, the amount of vitamin E in Weetabix is very low. And that's because the man who makes Weetabix doesn't want to throw his warehouse full of Weetabix away every week. Now, it's essential, it's known as the fertility vitamin. So it's essential for having babies, for example. Now, we all know that Down syndrome is caused by having an extra chromosome fertilized. So instead of having 46 chromosomes, you actually end 47. If you've got 47 and you fertilize it when it turns out in the 47, you end up with a Down syndrome child. Why? Well, it's simple. As the cell is coming down and splitting into 2 gametes of 23 chromosomes, the chemical reaction, lipid peroxidation, is taking place. The free radical impacts the cell, and it splits not into 2 equal portions, but its weakest point. And therefore you end up with 1 chromosome extra on one side, 1 short on the other. Now, if you've got the short, you can't have life. You must have at least 46 chromosomes to have life. But if you have the 47, then in point of fact, what you get is a Down syndrome child every time. Now, obviously, there are a lot of different genetic defects out there. And the reason for that is because the free radical is not aimed particularly at tearing out an extra chromosome. It's just a random impact. And what it's doing is it's causing damage. So that damage may be barely noticeable. You might not notice it at all, ever. Nobody might ever know it's there. It could be completely catastrophic and you are born as a completely brain-dead cabbage. You could be partially catastrophic and you can be born with Down syndrome, or like my son, the DeLange syndrome. Now, this is all down to big business and government, because big business want to make money. That is what they're in the game of. They're in the game of making money. They're not in the game of making sure that you have healthy babies or that you yourself are healthy. And so basically, they process the vitamin E out of the diet of anything that is wheat-based. And because they're processing it out, you would think that government would look at this, because this is all information which is readily available and has been. I mean, my son's 40 years ago, so it was readily available then, and I was reading books which were 40 years old then. It's been readily available for a long time. So it's up to government to say to big business, you must actually supply vitamin E with your food. Now, it's easy. They're processing the vitamin E out. Having processed it out, they probably sell it off to a drugs company like Roche or Pfizer, who put it in capsules and then sell it back to you at an exorbitant rate. Why don't they, with your packet of cornflakes, which has got, say, 10 servings in it, put in 10 capsules of vitamin E in these little press out things? So you have your capsule of vitamin E when you have your plate of cornflakes, your bowl of cornflakes. That way, their product doesn't go rancid and you're getting the goodness. That, in fact, would cost them money to do that. And that, in fact, they don't want to do because they're in the business of making lots of money for themselves. So it's up to government to tell them that they don't have a choice. They want to stay in business, they want to stay feeding the people, then in fact they have to do that. Now, if you go back in history, the amount of retarded children, the amount of mental illness around was very little. And the reason for that is because people were eating the food as it came out of the field. So if you were eating a loaf of bread, the wheat had been grown probably 5 miles away from where you live, being bought by a baker who'd converted it into flour and was baking you bread. Or you bought the flour and you baked your own bread. But the full goodness in the wheat was in the flour when you bought it. But it's not today. And the reason it's not today is because government are failing in their duty to look after us by making sure that the goodness is in the food. And other things are, you know, the big business is not interested in your health. It's only interested in putting this in the bank. And that's what all genetics and will tell you. If you do the research, you know, that's what it's all about. It's all about money, and people are dying, and children are being born with quite horrific conditions, purely and simply because somebody wants to make money.
Well, at the very least, Albert, it does appear to be that way, which is very interesting that you've chose to talk about this, as this wasn't something that I originally thought you had in mind to speak about.
No. Well, it wasn't when I had in mind either.
No, but it's just good because it reminds me of a YouTube video that Stav sent me regarding a TV program from 1972. Now, if Stav's available to speak, he can interrupt and give me the name of this TV show and explain a little bit more to you. As it's pretty much just confirmed what you've just said.
Yeah.
Yeah, very interesting, Albert. Very, very interesting indeed. And yes, actually, it's Dandy Nichols, who was the long-suffering wife of Alf Garnett until death us do part. You know it. Well, there was a particular one in 1972 where she's in the kitchen speaking to her daughter, which is Eunice Stubbs. I think. Yeah. And she's telling the story about her uncle that told her about all the things that would be considered a conspiracy theory today. And it touched on cancer that wasn't about governments saying you're only useful for one thing, and that's war. The rest of the time you're an embarrassment to them, to all sorts of things. And you could actually fit Dandy Nichols straight in what people talk about now on Facebook, and she wouldn't be out of place, Albert. Isn't that amazing?
Yeah. Well, it is, but then you see people have known for a long time, and just not many people have talked about it, and of those who talked about it, no buggers listened. And this is the point, isn't it? I mean, I went to see my Member of Parliament a while back because during my research into the law, I came across a thing from the 9th of May 1609, where the House of Commons said that any commoner could petition the House of Commons for anything, and the House of Commons must receive that petition, and that what they did about it was up to them, but they had to receive it and it had to be discussed. So I petitioned the House of Commons, and in fact, not a couple of years ago, when Gordon Brown was Prime Minister, and I said in the House of Commons that Gordon Brown and Alistair Darling, having made such a pig's ear of the finances of this country, were unfit to hold high office, and in fact I wanted them removed, and that Jack Straw, having allowed law to pass through Parliament which contravened our ancient and very good English constitution, had proved that he was not a fit custodian of the law of this country and not fit to sit in Parliament, and I wanted him removed. And I sent that to my Member of Parliament. Now, I did put it on the internet, because you know I put a lot of stuff on the internet, and say to people, why don't you write a similar letter? And I got the feedback. Lots of people wrote. Most of them sent it to the Speaker, and the Speaker sent them all back saying, this is nothing to do with me, you have to write to your Member of Parliament. Well, I'd done that, and I never heard any more. So I went and saw my Member of Parliament, John Howe, for Henley-on-Thames, and I saw him and I said, did you get my letter? And he said, yes, I did. And I said, what are you doing about it? And he said, nothing. I said, what do you mean nothing? He said, nothing. He said, I'm not doing anything about it. I said, have you presented it to Parliament? He said, no, and I'm not going to. I said, why not? And he said, because I'm not going to. And I said, well, hold on a minute. What you're telling me is that the House of Commons made a resolution on the 9th of May 1609 that I, as a commoner, could petition the House, and the House have to accept it. And he said, yes, that's correct. And I said, and you're telling me that you are in fact not prepared to comply with the resolution of the House of Commons? And he said, yes. And I said, well, that's not the system. You are elected to represent the views of the people who elect you. And he said, now I'm elected, I do what I want to do, not what anybody else wants, what I want to do. And I think that's pretty much the same with all of our members of Parliament today. They're not there for self-service, for serving us. They're there for self-service. They want the money, they want the kudos, they want the chance of having a good job in a posh bank or a posh company after they after they leave politics. And that's all they're interested in. They're only interested in me. And what we need to do is start getting politicians like we used to have, who are interested in the country and the country's people, and who do genuinely try to do the best they can for them. But you won't get them in the House of Commons, because right from day one, the House of Commons, when they were first invited in, the barons and the Burgesses and the knights of the shires were invited in, they decided that if the king wanted money raised in taxes, they could use that to blackmail the king into giving them something. Now, in 1420, they actually had given to them, by the king who wanted money, the right to initiate all legislation. So all of that legislation that you don't like, the stuff that you object to, like the bedroom tax and all that, originated in the House of Commons. Now, the House of Commons is supposed to represent the working man.
Is this before the window tax, Albert?
This is long before, yeah.
Yeah.
And so they're supposed to represent the working man, but they don't. And they represent themselves. And what they're doing is they are gradually becoming a thing. Now, in 1667, they demanded the right to issue money bills without the House of Lords looking at them. And the system that we had was very good. Our forefathers were not stupid, not by a long way, and they set up a system of government whereby it was a three-part government. The House of Commons initiate legislation, the House of Lords vet that legislation, and depending entirely upon their conscience, they will either reject it, amend it, or recommend it for an amendment and send it back, or they will pass it, entirely according to their conscience. In 1667, the House of Commons told the House of Lords they couldn't amend a money bill, In 1677, after a 10-year argument, the House of Lords said, we can't be bothered with this anymore, okay, we won't amend the money bill. That was a convention which has been running ever since. This is the convention that David Cameron was getting all upset about the other week because the House of Lords turned down the bill. And he was going on about the fact that, you know, they had broken this convention. In point of fact, the House of Lords hadn't broken the convention at all. If David Cameron knew anything about constitutional law, because he could talk constitutional law, but he doesn't, he would know that the convention was that they can't amend a money bill, but they can reject it. And they rejected it. They did exactly what the law said they can do. And they rejected it. And David Cameron screaming, well, they're going to suffer. I'm going to make them I'm going to punish them for rejecting the bill because they broke the convention. They didn't. Cameron knows absolutely sweet FA about our our law. In fact, I wrote to him a little while ago and told him that the man who taught him constitutional law, Professor Burnham Brogden on Oxford, he should take him and give him a thorough good kicking because he never taught him the right stuff. But you know, it is a fact that the House of Commons has always come down against the working man. The House of Lords with the hereditary peerage has always come down in favour of the working man. History tells us this. And if you look at the history, the House of Commons put up a bill which is going to hurt the working man. The House of Lords reject it or put in the necessary amendments to it. But nevertheless, that's what the House of Lords have always done. Now, it doesn't matter, because people say to me, oh yeah, but they've only done that because it suits them to have a happy workforce. It doesn't matter why they're doing it. It doesn't matter if they want a happy workforce, so they're going to stop people doing something that's going to hurt the working man. It doesn't matter if that's the only reason they're doing it, or whether they genuinely care for the people on their estates and they genuinely don't want to see them hurt. It is irrelevant. The fact of the matter is the House of Lords has always defended the working man. The House of Commons has always shit on the working man from a vast altitude, and they will keep on doing it until somebody stops them. And you know, I mean, I just get so despondent, I suppose is the word, over the House of Commons, because they are on a power grab. They have, with the Parliament Act, they have neutered the House of Lords. They have stolen the royal prerogative from the Queen. In fact, they stole it from King George V, and it's never come back. But the system was that the House of Commons originate, the House of Lords vet it, and according to their conscience agree it or not. If they agree it goes before the King, and the King, using his conscience and only his conscience, will decide whether he's going to give it the royal assent or not. And if he says no, it doesn't matter. If everybody in the country says, no, we want this, if the King says, no, I'm not giving it the royal assent, that's it, it's dead. Because this is left entirely to the King's conscience. Fortunately for us, generally speaking, we have had one or two bad ones, but generally speaking for us, our kings have really been quite good. They understand full well that they need the support of the people, so they don't go out to kick the people. They go out to do what they can, which is in the best interest of the people. The House of Lords has always done what was in the best interest of the people. It's the House of Commons which is the problem, and the House of Commons is on this power grab. Now they've neutered the House of Lords. Not only have they neutered the House of Lords, they've stolen the royal prerogative. The King was educated by a Fabian in constitutional law from the age of 12 to 22 when she became Queen. The most formative years in her life, to believe that she has no authority. She has no authority. And I knew a man, he was a friend of mine, and he died a couple of years back, called John Gourier. John Gourier had been a major in a yeomanry regiment, and the yeomanry regiments are very exclusive. If Daddy isn't a millionaire 10 times over, you can't afford to be an officer in that regiment because, you know, the mess bill is so much. But nevertheless, he was a major in a yeomanry regiment, and he spent a considerable amount of his career working with the royal family at Buckingham Palace, Windsor Castle, travelling around with them. And basically, he said to me that the Queen herself is absolutely hopping mad at what is being done to this country by government, but feels she is entirely powerless to operate. But if there was a revolution in this country, and if the people rebelled, the Queen would very quickly come down on the side of the people. He said if you mention the European Union in front of Princess Anne, the air is bluer than it has ever been in any barrack room he has ever been in his life, because Princess Anne apparently hates the European Union with a total vengeance.
I know you're quite fond of Princess Anne.
I love Princess Anne. Princess Anne is not only she not only quietly does the job, but she does the job and she does it very efficiently and very well. But you never hear about it because she's not like Diana screaming it from the rooftops. Oh, look at me, I'm working with AIDS children, AIDS victims. Oh, look at me, I'm walking across minefields and all the rest of it. Princess Anne doesn't do that. Princess Anne quietly does it all in the background, but she does infinitely more than any of the others. And so not only is she hard-working and dedicated, but she also has great physical courage, because when her car was stopped in Park Lane, I think it was Park Lane, by a gunman who shot her security man, and he opened the door to the car at the back of the car, and he told her to get out. And Princess Anne turned around and said to him, I am a princess of the blood royal. I don't take orders. And he was standing there with a gun threatening to shoot her, and she would not do what he said. And while he was stood there arguing with her, two passers-by jumped on him and restrained him until the police arrived. But Princess Anne would simply not. I mean, she would rather die than take an order from a man with a gun. That shows great physical and moral courage, and I think she has that. I would love to see Princess Anne as Queen, I have to say, because I would really love to see somebody like Tony Blair go into Buckingham Palace and tell Queen Anne that she has got to do this, that or the other, because I think she'd take that riding crop of hers and give it a totally new use. You know, and I would love to see it. I'd love to be a fly on the wall, because one thing about Princess Anne, she does not take fools gladly. You know, she doesn't suffer fools gladly, and to a certain extent, I don't either. You know, I'm getting mellow in my old age, so I do try to, you know, wrap up my get losts a bit more now, but you know, it's one of those things, isn't it? But you know, people have a tremendous misunderstanding of what is going on and what the law is and everything else. And the only way you can understand the law is if you actually study the law. And government are not helping, because government, when they're talking about a constitution, they put out this book. It's called Inside Britain, a guide to the UK Constitution. And it says in here, right at the beginning, you won't be able to read it, but it says in here that it was never formally stated that the Queen or King must agree to any proposal for a new law passed by both Houses of Parliament. So says the government today. This is a tome by Sir Matthew Hale. Sir Matthew Hale, acknowledged as England's greatest ever judge. He was a Chief Justice. He was Chief Justice to Charles I. And when Oliver Cromwell killed Charles I, he asked Sir Matthew Hale if he would in fact become Chief Justice for the Republic. And Matthew Hale said, no, I'm a royalist, you've killed my king. And Cromwell said to him, well, look, the choice is simple. You either become Chief Justice and you supervise law the way you want it to be run, or I impose law from on high. And put like that, he became Chief Justice to Cromwell's Parliament. But in this particular book, he actually says in here that Parliament must get the royal assent to any law that they pass. Now, this book was written in 1713. So in 1713, the Chief Justice of England knew that Parliament had to get the royal assent. But in the 2000s, in fact, when this book was published, Parliament seemed to feel that they can do everything they like. Don't know when this was published. Let me have a quick look, see if I can see it. No, it doesn't tell you. But that they can do what they like without any interference from the king. If they pass a law through both houses, they don't need the king's assent. And in fact, a Lord Guterbock, who was the, I think, the 19th Earl Berkeley, was a drinking pal of Tony Blair. So when he threw out the hereditary peers, he couldn't keep Guterbock in. So he actually made Guterbock a life peer with the title Lord Guterbock. And Lord Guterbock was putting a bill before Parliament to actually make it the law that they did not have to consult the Queen about any bills that were going through. So I promptly wrote a allegation of treason against Lord Guterbock, and that's been accepted by 2 or 3 police forces. We now have 5 separate allegations of treason which have been accepted between them by 17 police forces nationally. What we've asked the police forces to do, and what we say to them when we report treason, when the English Constitution Group report treason, what we say to them is, we understand that, you know, dealing with this subject is going to cost a lot of money. We understand that. County forces don't have that money. But we also, the person who's submitting the allegation, I live in your police area, so I'm reporting this crime of treason to you. I want a crime number from you, but if you decide that there is another police force somewhere else which is better placed financially or geographically to actually undertake this inquiry, feel free to pass it to them to undertake. But I want a crime book number from you. We now have crime book numbers from 17 police forces, all of whom have referred the matter to the Metropolitan Police. The Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Bernard Hogan Howe, is absolutely refusing to investigate the allegations of treason. And I sent my copy of the Maastricht treason allegation to him. And he came back with a letter saying that they weren't going to do anything about it because my allegation was vexatious. So I wrote back to him. I'm still waiting for the reply. And I said to him, if you believe my allegation is vexatious, rather than a genuine allegation of crime backed up by the evidence, i.e. the Maastricht Treaty, and the law, then you believe I am wasting police time contrary to Section 5.2 of the 1967 Criminal Law Act, which carries a power of arrest. And because I am naming government officials by name, government ministers by name, you could arrest me for the major crime of perjury at common law. So why don't you come along and arrest me for perjury, and we will see whether a jury of my peers agree with you or not. And then I said they won't, of course, and the minute they find me not guilty, I will turn around to the bench and I will ask the judge to issue bench warrants for your arrest and your staff's arrests, individually for misprision of treason and collectively for compounding treason. I'm prepared to risk 7 years of my life being convicted of perjury. Are you prepared to risk the rest of your life just to keep Tony Blair and John Major out of prison? I'm still waiting for the reply.
Now that's interesting, Albert, because I've heard similar people talking about the misprision of treason, where they've been unlawfully, shall we say, have had arrest warrants. I don't know if you're aware of the particular group I'm talking about, but they've actually got arrest warrants, but basically forgotten, because they've said that they're reporting the crime of treason and named names. They've also, whether under the invoking of Article 61 of the Magna Carta in 2001 by then peers, disgruntled peers, whatever they may be, but they did invoke Article 61, which is fact and reported by several mainstream news.
I actually have a copy of their petition.
Yes, well then you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Now they don't rebuke any of this, and it's strange how these, should we say, these warrants for arrest, etc., all of a sudden disappear, or should we say, are forgotten.
Well, as far as I know, the only people operating with warrants are the common law courts. Unfortunately, the common law courts have no legal validity. No, they have no legal validity. Every single one of Her Majesty's courts is a common law court. The problem is they will only hear a case under the law under which it is presented. So it's no good you going to court because you're not paying your council tax and saying, I want this heard as a common law court, and are you under your common law oath to deal with this? Because firstly, judges have never been under a common law oath at all. They originally would have been under the oath from whichever king was there, the act of supremacy for whichever king was around at the time. But basically, from the Act of Supremacy of 1559, which would apply to any judges we're talking about, and this was changed in I think 1868. When they brought in the Oaths Act, where now judges now take two oaths. They take an oath of loyalty to the Crown, and they take an oath to carry out their duties as judges in an unbiased and professional manner. So they take two oaths. And when people say to a policeman, are you operating under your oaths? And he says, yes. And they then get, can I see your warrant card? And he says, no. He's actually wrong, because if anybody, whether you're in uniform or not, anybody can demand to see your warrant card, and it has to be shown. But when they ask you, are you under your oath, and you don't answer, the fact that you are there in your police uniform means that you're acting under your oath. The same with a judge. No good going to court and saying to the judge, are you acting under your oath? He's standing there with all his bloody rubber, he's sitting there with all his robes on. Of course he's acting under his oath. If he weren't, he wouldn't be there. But he doesn't take one oath, he takes two. And not many people know that. And because not many people know that, they come up with all sorts of silly ideas. And as I say, the only courts that I know that have issued arrest warrants are the common law courts, which were brought in by this, what's his bloody name? Defrocked Canadian priest. Can't think of his name.
This was a chap who was a former priest, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Yeah, in his
Kevin Annett.
That's right. Yeah.
Kevin Annett. Yeah. Kevin Annett's got this idea of these things, but you see, Kevin Annett is issued warrants for the arrest of the Queen for the kidnap, murder, and sexual abuse, sexual abuse, and murder of 8 native children from Canada. from an orphanage, and he's accusing the Queen and Prince Philip of abducting 8 children from this orphanage and sexually abusing them and murdering them and then disposing of the bodies. And people believe it. I mean, the number of people who believe it is astronomical, which you know, to my mind, just proves how stupid some people are. Because frankly, how is she going to do that? You're talking about the most heavily guarded woman in the world. She absolutely is the most heavily guarded woman in the world. Wherever she goes, she has a team of Scotland Yard detectives, all with guns. Wherever she goes, if she goes to Canada, the Canadian government will supply their own close protection officers on top of the Scotland Yard protection officers. Not only that, you can guarantee that MI6 from our side and the Canadian version of MI6 will be thick on the ground, making sure that nobody who is a threat to the Queen gets anywhere near her. On top of that, there will be thousands upon thousands of the people everywhere she goes, hoping to catch a glimpse of her, most of whom have got cameras. So how, in fact, is she supposed to kidnap 8 kids, take them off all on her lonesome with Prince Philip, sexually abuse them, murder them, and then dispose of the bodies without anybody knowing? You know, it is just sheerly ridiculous idea that she could do that. And if you say one of the things they said, well, she buried them in the estate. The minimum depth at which you can bury a body is 3 feet. So if her and Philip went out there, they have to dig 8 graves, 3 feet deep. How long is that going to take? Then they've got to fill them in, and then they've got to fill them in such a way that the turf is back in place so that nobody notices there are 8 graves. Because the one thing about graves is they are a very distinctive shape. And if you've got 8 of them suddenly appear, you know, somebody is likely to ask why. What are they? What's buried in them? And, you know, but even then, how long is it going to take to dig a hole 3 feet deep? Let's say they're children, say 4 foot long and 2 foot wide, in order to drop a kid's body. How long is it going to take to dig that hole? You're going to do it in an hour? Maybe hour and a half? You know, even young fit people would take an hour and a half. How are you going to do that in the time? 8 times over. How is she going to get missed? How is she not going to be missed? How is it there's going to be no hue and cry about where is the Queen for those, call it 6 hours that she's digging graves?
Well,
they're just not on.
And maybe the whole thing is being, you know, disinformed, misinformed. We know that lower down the order of the administration of a lot of government, well, we know the allegations are there everywhere you look. That maybe some of these people that are lower down below in some form of administration do such dastardly and disgusting acts and things like the paedophile inquiry in Parliament.
Oh, no, I don't doubt that at all. I do not doubt that at all.
And they're using their position of privilege to do these things. And then who knows that maybe they may use that as leverage of blackmail of top of further up officials. Or, I mean, it's one hell of a, you know.
Well, the story is, isn't it, that you know, MI5 knew all about all this going on, and the police knew about all this going on. The police were told to back off by MI5. They backed off, and MI5 used it to blackmail the people who were doing it. You know, I can't see that, because I look at this as, you know, we're going back many years now, until when we had actually got good coppers. You know, when we actually had good policemen. And I can't see it happening, because I don't know a single police officer that I served with, if MI5 came along and said, we know your member of parliament is, you know, you're about to arrest him for paedophilia, but you're not allowed to do that. He's to be left alone. I don't know a single policeman that I served with who wouldn't then promptly arrest the officer from MI5 and charge him with obstructing them in their duty, because that's what I would have done. And I don't know anybody that I served with who wouldn't do the same thing. And I cannot believe, and then you've got all of these officers coming forward now saying, well, we were investigating this, but we were told to back off by MI5, so we backed off. Why? Why? What's more to the point, why the hell are they drawing a pension? Because they have breached their oath to carry out their job as a constable to the best of their ability and without favour, fear, malice or ill will. And it is against the law to sexually abuse children. So how can they keep their oath and keep their honour and keep their pension when they breach their oath and allow children to suffer? You know, it's just, to my mind, it just beggars belief, frankly.
Well, these are the questions, Albert, that are, are being asked by people worldwide now, and it's really down to that where solutions need to be thought up of and delivered.
I've actually written, well, there are solutions. I've actually written, because I said English law covers everything. I've actually written and said to the Commissioner of Police that I want him to investigate not merely the allegations of rape and the rapist, but I want him to investigate the officers who knew about this and walked away and allowed it to continue to being accessories to these rapes and prostituting of these children under the Accessories and Abettors Act of 1861. So, I've actually asked the Commissioner to do that, and I'm still waiting for a reply to that one as well.
Well, I totally agree with you on that one. What I was saying is, today, not many people that I seem to speak to have got any belief or trust or anything to do with the government. So how can we rectify this? And I know in your case, you're saying that there's things put in place to prevent things like child abuse, yeah? So we're not really looking for solutions as such. But how do we get the trust back? Where do we stand?
I personally don't like Nigel Farage. I think Nigel Farage is just in it for himself. However, having said that, there are an awful lot of very good people in UKIP. My desire would be to see that the next time we have an election, everybody in this country votes UKIP, and just take the Labour, Liberal and Tory parties out of the equation. Let's fill both sides of the House with UKIP MEP, with UKIP members of Parliament, because that would be a game changer. Because once they are in Parliament, there are an awful lot of good people there who will set about rectifying things that have gone wrong. I'll say, I personally, I don't like Nigel Farage. I don't trust the man. I think he's in it for himself. But there are a tremendous amount of really good people in UKIP, and I think that we have to rely upon them. And I think that as long as we're voting Labour, Tory and Liberal, we are going to get exactly what we expect to get, which is ripped off and ignored.
Yeah, I agree. I can agree, but at the same time, it doesn't give people faith with governments when you've only got the UKIP to deal with.
Well, I know that, but it will only be.
It's not making it any easier for those.
No, but it will only be for one Parliament, because believe me, the minute they're all out of a job and all out of office, the Tory party are going to come along and the Labour party are going to come along and say, hang on, what are we doing wrong? We better change.
Well, we can do that, Albert, by simply putting all politicians on minimum wage.
Yeah. But you see, the other thing is that what I find is very frustrating is we have a lot of groups. We've got the BNP, we've got the EDL, we've got Britain First. We've got all these groups. They're all doing their own thing. They're all doing reasonably good jobs, right? But they refuse to work together. Now, there is, I believe, an EDL march planned for next year, I think for March, where they want to get all of the other groups together. And I was talking to Jenna Luca, the organiser for this march, one who wants to organise it. And I said to her, you have to get everybody else marching with you, because it's no good 200 people in the BNP marching, they get laughed at. No good 200 people in the EDL marching, you get laughed at. But if you could pull in thousands of people from all over the country, that's when governments stop laughing. And it's exactly the same with my reporting treason. When I stood up at my first conference at Stoke on Trent for the British Constitution route, I said two things. This is a numbers game. We must have the numbers, and it will take time. And we've never actually achieved the numbers. I mean, I've got in my group at the moment probably about 250 people, most of whom don't do a lot, I have to say. But with the ones that do a lot, we've managed to get 17 police forces to accept 5 separate allegations of treason between them, which is more than anybody else has ever done.
That's great stuff. I'd like you to explain a bit more about treason, what we were talking about earlier, for the viewers.
Yeah, well, basically, when you have a state set up, you have certain rules set in place for the administration of that state, and you appoint certain people to positions to administer the state. Now, it depends. If you're a republic, then you have a president. If you're a monarchy like we are, we have a queen. But you could have it run by a group of people sitting around a table who just come in on an ad hoc basis, if you like, and just sit down and discuss what they've got to do, and then go out and get somebody else to do the work. But you must have some form of hierarchy in the country and some form of government. That government will draw up rules of behaviour. Now, we've been very lucky in England because our governments and our kings have been really quite switched on, really, and they've not been the money grabbing people that people think they are. And I get really fed up with people saying the Queen is a benefit scrounger. She's not. The reason she is not a benefit scrounger is because in the beginning, when we first elected our first kings, what we did was, the people, our forefathers did, was to actually say, because they weren't stupid, they actually said, well, the king must be above everybody else, and visibly above everybody else. So it's no good saying, Harry on the corner, you're going to be the king, and then leaving Harry living on the corner. Because nobody's going to take any notice of Harry as a king, because they don't take any notice of Harry as the guy on the corner. So he has to be above. So when you take Harry and you make him your king, and then the people decided that they would allocate vast estates to Harry and lots of money to Harry. So now Harry is somebody that everybody has to look up to because he lives in that big castle and he's got all that money and all them soldiers. So you look up to Harry. Now, we also say to Harry, this is the law of the land, and you could do this and this and this. But what you can't do, Harry, is you can't go around and throw people into jail unless they've been found guilty in a court of law. What you can't do is you can't just come along and take our money and our property just because you feel like taking our money and our property. You know, you might have the ability to do that, but the law says you can't and you can't. And if you do that, then the law will sort you out. Now, we've had a few kings who've tried that. King John was forced to sign Magna Carta against his will because the entire people of the country came together to actually try him out. Now, I don't know how many of you know what the Estates of England are, but the Estates of England are the Lords Spiritual, i.e. that is the bishops, the Lords Temporal, that is the ordinary barons, earls, dukes, viscounts, whatever, and the commonalty of England. The king is not part of the Estates of England, although he is over and above every other part of the Estates of England. And the Estates of England is the most powerful law-giving body in the country. They don't meet very often. When they do, it's in times of national emergency. The Estates of England met King John at Runnymede. We had the barons were there, the bishops were there, and the commonalty of England travelled from miles around, all with their broadswords and all with their bows and arrows, to go and see King John, to let him know that they were unhappy with the way he was governing them and that they were changing it. And if the King John didn't agree to the change, then they could bury him at Runnymede. But they were changing it. And they drew up Magna Carta, which was virtually a rewrite of the Charter of Liberties of 1100. They met again in 1366, because one of the silly things that King John did was in 1213 he surrendered England to the Pope. Now, I see an awful lot of stuff on the internet which says, you know, England belongs to the Pope and the Pope is the ruler and he controls the royal family and all the rest of it. Complete and utter crap. Because although King John surrendered England to the Pope, King John's son, Henry III, as soon as he became old enough to rule in his own name, stopped paying the £1,000 a year, 1,000 marks a year that John had been paying to the Pope as a if you like, a bounty to the Pope to allow John to continue ruling as a vassal king to Rome. He not only did he stop that, he actually wrote to the Pope and told him that he, Henry, answered directly to God for all things ecclesiastical and not to the Pope, and for all things spiritual to the people of England. So he actually reversed the ruling that King John had made. So from the reign of Henry III, England has rejected any sort of saying from the Pope. However, in 1366, the then Pope wrote to King Edward III demanding the unpaid money, which was about 160,000 marks. Edward knew nothing about this, so he spoke to the bishops and to the barons. They asked for time and they went away and spoke to the commons. So this was a meeting of the estates of England. And in the following day they went back to King Edward and they told Edward that England did not belong to King John. And I want you to remember this because it's a really seriously highly important constitutional ruling. England did not belong to King John. He only held it in trust. And it was not his to give away. And that by giving it away, he had broken the law and it didn't count. The monies were not to be paid, and Edward was not a vassal king to Europe, or to the Pope. Now that comes from a book called Select Statutes on English constitutional law. The next time they met was in January 1689, 88 depending upon which calendar you use, but generally speaking I say 1689, where they met to basically sack King James II and to elect to office William III, the Prince of Orange, and his wife Mary. Now Mary was the next one in line to the throne after her father. So when they sacked him, it should have been Mary. But Mary would not rule over her husband. Wouldn't it be nice to have a wife like that, fellas, say? Mary would not rule over her husband, and her husband would not be a servant of his wife's. So for the first and only time in history, we had a king and a queen of equal status, both king and queen in their own right, both lawfully anointed at Westminster Abbey, but with the administration of the country being placed in the hands of William. That was the last time the Estates of England met, and they drew up the Declaration of Rights, which had to be shown to William and Mary, and they were told, if you want the crown of England, you can have it, but you have to agree to the terms of the declaration. So they agreed to the terms of the declaration, and William turned around and said, well, I'm not going to have an election for Parliament because I've already got the representatives of the people here, who were not, I have to say, they were not the same people who had been in James's government that he had prorogued. They largely came from an earlier government of Charles's, but they also had other people in it as well, who were just elected and sent from their boroughs all over the country to Westminster with the object of telling the people in power how we, the English, wish to be ruled. They drew up the Declaration of Rights, so William then was shown that, him and Mary accepted the terms, and they were then crowned. having been crowned, William then called a parliament, but he used the representatives of the people. One of the first things they did was put the Bill of Rights of 1689 into law, as statute law. Now the government today say, well, we can in fact repeal the Bill of Rights of 1689 because it's statute law, so we can repeal it. And of course they can. What they can't do is they can't repeal the Charter of Liberties. And there is a contract between not the Charter of Liberties, the Declaration of Right. And there is a contract between the Kings of England made by William and Mary and the people that they would uphold the terms of the Declaration of Rights. So they can repeal the Bill of Rights if they want to. The Declaration of Rights then steps forward and stops them all doing all of the things that they wanted to repeal or do when they repealed the Bill of Rights. And government,
the same would apply to the Magna Carta as well. The
Declaration. The same thing, because this was an agreement. It is not a parliamentary act. Because they put it as statute law in 1297, they think they can repeal it and it will go away. It won't, because the 1215 Magna Carta is the only one which counts, because that was a contract between the King of England and his subjects. And like all contracts, it's legally enforceable. In fact, Magna Carta puts in a mechanism by which it can be legally enforced under Article 61, which is to seize the property and the castles of the king until such times as he comes into line.
You used the word subjects there for a minute, Albert. Can I just ask, I know why, but would you like to tell the viewers why you chose to use the word subjects and not barons?
Well, because I wasn't talking about barons, I was talking about the general population, barons included, and we are all subjects of the Queen.
True, but when people hear the word Magna Carta, it's what seems to come.
Well, you see, there's a lot of misunderstanding about Magna Carta. So many people say this was a contract. In fact, I heard a government minister say it the other day. This is a contract between the barons and the king, right? It is no such thing. When the people realised that King John was being forced to meet the barons at Magna Carta, they all went to their cupboards and they drew out, because King John was suppressing the ordinary people of England with foreign mercenaries. They were sick to the back teeth of him. He was also forcing the wives of barons into his bed, and because they weren't being overly cooperative, because they didn't want to be there, they were basically being raped. On the understanding that if they didn't get into his bed, he would have their husbands killed. So to keep their husbands alive, they went to bed with him, but they weren't there willingly and they weren't being cooperative. So he would then go to court the next day and say, "Oh, Baron so-and-so's wife is a terrible lay." And of course the barons wanted him dead for that, and the people of England wanted him dead because of the foreign mercenaries that he was using to suppress them. So basically, a lot of people wanted him dead. So when the ordinary common people found out about the meeting at Runnymede, what they then did was they all grabbed their bows and arrows out of the cupboard and their broadswords and whatever armour they happened to have, because in those days you had to equip yourself for war to the best of your financial ability. So if you were middle class, you'd probably end up with a suit of armour, or at least with a decent breastplate and helmet. If you were quite poor, you'd end up with a bow and arrow because you could make those yourself, and that's what you had to have. In fact, you had to, if you were between, if you had to, let me turn this phone off of mine. Keep beeping at me.
No worries. Yeah, I just thought I'd divert your attention there just to get that one across for viewers, because I thought that was quite important, Albert.
Yeah. So they all arrived at the field, and it was made plain to John if he didn't agree with the contract that he was being asked to sign, then in fact he would not leave the field alive. Now there are those who say, well, because he was forced into signing the contract, it doesn't count. But let's actually look at what was in the contract. Everything that was in the contract was already the law of England. He was only asked to say he would rule us according to our law as it already was. And when Parliament today say that the Bill of Rights removed the authority of the King and transferred it to Parliament, if you read the Bill of Rights, there's absolutely nothing in the Bill of Rights that says that. It simply reiterates the things the king cannot do, like throw you into jail without you being tried in a court of law for an offence and being found guilty. The king cannot make you pay any fine or forfeiture unless you've been found guilty in a court of law. So when Parliament today pass a law that says if your car is not insured, then we're going to take your car and we're going to sell it, according to the Bill of Rights, that's theft, because you are forfeiting your car before you've been found guilty of any offence in a court of law.
Unless they have 12 magical peers that nobody ever sees.
Yeah, but it's theft. It's theft, because until you've actually been found guilty in a court of law, then you know, you have this thing that they are breaking the law themselves by doing that, which is why if I was still a police officer, there is no way on God's earth I would seize a car or any other property, other than drugs, of course, or weapons. But you know, these are all things which are highly illegal. It might be highly illegal to drive down the road without your car insurance, but it's not really what you call major crime, is it? You know, and so basically, these things were meetings of the Estates of England who laid down the rules, and because they have the right to hire and fire kings and governments, everything that the Estates of England do can't be challenged. They can't be challenged. The only way to challenge the Estates of England is, in fact, to call a meeting of the Estates of England, put the case to the Estates of England, and see if they're prepared to change it. Now, when I say call a meeting of the Estates of England, I mean, I'll get myself into terrible trouble here. I believe that when we're talking about constitutional law, the only people who should decide questions of constitutional law should be the indigenous people of this island. Now, I have a great deal of respect for Sikhs and for Gurkhas, because for 300 years or so they have fought very hard alongside the British Army, and they have fought very well on our behalf. So I have great respect for them. But they are Sikhs and they are Gurkhas, and they have their own set of rules and their own set of laws. And I do not believe that they should have any say whatsoever in any constitutional changes in this country. There was recently put out by the University College of London, which is a right commie bloody outpost if ever there was one, a thing on constitutional change. And I went on their website and I actually asked if I could go on their program, but they wouldn't let me. But I went on their website, but half the people, over half of the people who were talking about constitutional change for this country were not English. You know, they came from far distant lands, and they should have no say, because they have no way of knowing how we think, how we feel, how we want to do things. And we all have an instinctive belief from birth, if you like. We all have this instinctive belief from birth as to what's right and what's wrong. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, Albert, you've referred to them as denizens, yeah? Would you agree?
Well, yeah.
So, what's your definition on indigenous? Can I ask you that? Or may
well,
I
mean that you are indigenous to this nation if you can trace your ancestry back, sort of 500 years or something. You're indigenous to Britain. Now, I'm not saying the Scots and the Welsh shouldn't be able to have a vote, because I think they should. However, because we are the United Kingdom now. However, I do think that when we're talking about the English Constitution, because there are two constitutions currently in use in this kingdom, one is the English and the other is the Scots. And I think the Scots should be able to decide what their constitution tells them, and I think we should be able to decide what our constitution says. So it means in questions of the English constitution, the English and the Welsh decide, and the Scots have no say, and we have no say. Either the English or the Welsh have no say in what the Scots do with their constitution, because they were allowed to keep their own law by Edward III when he defeated their armies, captured their king, and their king agreed to rule Scotland as a vassal king to Edward, on the understanding they got to keep Scottish law. So they kept Scottish law. So they're not part of the English constitution. So I think, as far as that's concerned, and I also think that nobody should get the vote in this country just because you get off a boat and go and register to vote. I think before you get a vote in this country, you have got to have a period whereby you come to this country, you work and you work hard, and you pay your taxes and you support this country. So somebody like Anjem Chowdhury would never ever get a vote off of me. Never, not in a million years would he get a vote, because he's come here. He is so anti-English, it's untrue. I don't know why nobody's actually run him over, hasn't run him over with a bloody lorry right now. But I mean, it is,
Yeah.
to my mind, it is important that the things that are important to the English should only ever be decided by the English. Now that's probably going to make everybody say, well, he's racist and he's this and he's that. I don't care what they think. I'm English.
Well, you can also, you know, it's a conversation that has been brought up in past many times regarding prisoners and they're having their right to vote and things like that.
Well, you see, I think we should stick to English law. You go to prison, you lose your right to vote.
Where would we stand now, Albert, with things like the Mental Health Act and being deemed non-compos mentis and things like that? How is he aware that that could affect people being able to vote today?
Well, I think if you're mentally ill, you shouldn't be allowed to vote, because you have really got no idea what you're voting about or anything else. But I mean, basically, that doesn't mean that you're not looked after.
The Mental Health Act can be easily abused, Albert.
Oh, it can be very easily abused, and I'm sure it is very easily abused every day of the week. You've got this, threat laws, haven't you? Where, you know, if you're a threat, if they consider you a threat to the state, then they just come and arrest you and lock you up in a mental home, rather than put you on trial and go for it a legitimate way.
For the people who are like victims in that, and they have, you know, come up against abuse of such things, would the Declaration of Rights have anything to protect them on that?
It has everything to protect them. Absolutely everything to protect them. And it's like parking tickets. Now, Magna Carta and the Declaration of Rights say that you cannot find or suffer any forfeiture. Magna Carta says diocese, which means the same thing. You can't be fined or suffer any forfeiture unless you've been found guilty of an offence in a court of law. Now, if a police officer gives you a parking ticket, on that parking ticket, it will offer you the opportunity to dispute that in a court of law if you want to. Most people look at it and they say, well, you know, it used to be when I was policing £30 fine or something silly. Most people look at it and they say, oh, it's not really worth my while going to court over that amount of money, so I'll pay the fine, because I'm going to lose more in wages and all the rest of it than I'm going to actually save. So they cut their losses and they go and they pay the fine. But when they took parking tickets away from the police and gave them to the local authorities to deal with, local authorities don't have on their parking tickets that you can go to court to dispute it. You can go to a tribunal. Now, the tribunal is heavily biased in favour of the authority. Yeah. So the chances of actually getting your parking tickets reversed is pretty well remote, unless you're pretty switched on. Yeah. Now, that is wrong. But government, when you say to government, as people have done, and they've quoted the Bill of Rights and gone to court and quoted the Bill of Rights, and the Council of Representatives said, this is not a fine, it is a civil debt, because you parked on a yellow line, and it's a civil debt. Well, that's fine. Let's keep it as a civil debt, which means it's not dealt with by your local magistrates court. It should be dealt with by the local Crown Court, because it's a civil debt, and civil debts are matters of administrative law, and they are dealt with by the Crown Court. You should still go to court on it, but you don't get that opportunity. You go to a what do you call them, a tribunal. If the tribunal rejects it,
Albert, administered tribunal. I suggest everybody goes and look on the .org or the Justice Court System, wherever they get the information. It explicitly states that tribunals are not bound by the rules of evidence. It states.
No, I know they're not. I know they're not. But you see, I mean, I went to a tribunal with a friend of mine because his children were all fine till they had the MMR, and then all of his children suddenly arrived at autism. And he wanted his child to go to this particular school. Local council didn't want to. They said that the school she was in was perfectly adequate and that she was doing this, that, and the other. And he said, will you come to the tribunal with me? And I sat there with him in the tribunal, and I listened to social workers, and I listened to teachers and educational psychologists, all prattling away. And I just sat there quietly and listened and listened and listened. And then the chairman of the tribunal said to me, he said, oh, it's Mr. Burgess, isn't it? And he said, yeah. And he said, you're sitting there very quietly, would you like to say something? And I said, well, yeah, actually, I think I would. And he said, what would you like to say? And I said, well, I've listened to all of these people talking about a child that I know. This child comes and plays in my living room with my children, and my children go to their living room and play in their living room, and I go around and have a cup of tea with their mum and dad, right, and a chat. So I know this child quite well. And I've listened to the teachers, and I've listened to the educational psychologists, and I've listened to the social services, and they are talking about a child I don't recognise. I said, now, before I go any further, I will tell you this. I don't have any letters after my name. None at all. However, I have got 30 years in as a voluntary youth leader, and I have had 7 children of my own. So I understand and I know children. And what these people are talking to me, they are telling me about a child that I don't know. Because it certainly isn't this little girl here who's waiting outside with her mum. I said, it's certainly not her. And I said, so I don't know who these people are talking about, but it's certainly not this child that the tribunal is discussing. And that was it. The tribunal chairman just said, okay, I think we've heard enough. If you'd like to wait outside for a few minutes, when they come back, the council were ordered to send her to the school her dad wanted to go to. You know, because the tribunal simply didn't believe the teachers and everybody else. You know, you can always fight these things, but you need to do it in a sensible manner. And it's no good.
Sorry, Albert. Going back onto councils for just a second, yeah.
Yeah.
Where did it all change? Where councils seem to think that they're landowners? Or correct me if I'm wrong.
Well, councils own nothing.
They are trustees of a public trust, right?
They simply administer the local area for the public, and should be in the public's best interest. However, if you look on your council, who do you see? You haven't got any barons on there, have you? You've got the working man on your council, the working man and the working woman. And the working man and the working woman, generally speaking, if you give them authority, it goes to their bloody heads because they're not used to it. They are seriously not used to it. Now, I'm a bit different if you're talking about me, because I went to boarding school, and my last boarding school, my headmaster was a half colonel, the youngest half colonel in the Second World War. My deputy head was the Lieutenant Commander of the Royal Naval Volunteer Reserve, who came from a long line of naval officers. My science master was a Spitfire pilot. And I wasn't taught to add up and subtract, because I'm hopeless at maths, which is why I don't like money. But I was taught to think, to feel, and to act like an officer and a gentleman. And my deputy headmaster said to me one day, he said, Albert, he said, it's no good waiting for a 16-inch brick to hit the bridge and kill everybody on the bridge, and then finding you're the senior officer there. You have to walk around and you have to think to yourself, Any second now, a 16-inch brick's going to kill everybody on the bridge. I'm now in command. What am I going to do? And that's what I do everywhere I go. I walk down the road and I'm thinking, if that bus runs into that shop, what am I going to do? And that way you've always got a plan. You've always got a plan, and then command takes over. So I've been basically taught by people who knew how to lead, how to lead. You've all seen me on talks, probably. Most of you have seen me on talks. I don't use notes. The reason I don't use notes is because I did the instructional technique course with the Royal Navy, and the chief instructor, chief petty officer instructor, who was teaching us, said to us, if you need notes to teach anything, you don't know what you're talking about, and you shouldn't be teaching it. You should know exactly what you're doing, what you're going to be talking about before you get into the room. You know? And he's right. You shouldn't need notes. You should be able to talk about it off the top of your head. Now I know that's a generalization, and somebody's going to say, well, if you're teaching engineering, you've got to have plans, you've got to have notes to follow, and all the rest of it. But basically, as a general rule, I get sick to the back teeth of going to conferences and stuff and seeing people standing there with reams of A4 paper in their hands, reading word for word what they've got on the A4 paper. I never do that. I never ever do that. And nobody is listening. If you're going to do that, nobody is listening. For starters, you're reading it on the paper, so you're talking to the paper, so you're not throwing your voice, so nobody's listening. And everybody's sitting there thinking, oh, well, he obviously doesn't know what the hell he's talking about, because he's written it all down, and he's going to tell us what he's written down. So everybody switches off. It's counterproductive. So, you know, you have to have that, if you like, leadership ability, the ability to talk without notes. To a certain extent, Roger Hayes has that, but then Roger Hayes was a four-ring captain in the Merchant Navy for many years. So he's used to command, but it doesn't make what he's saying any more sensible. So
it's about Roger Hayes and the rest of these guys, and you've got UK Column, you've got all these different things, and like you were saying earlier, you know, you've got all these different groups, basically, you know, talking about the same thing. Yeah, the same thing. What's going wrong? There's something wrong. It needs to be put right. How can we stop what's going to happen? Because you don't have to be too, you don't have to have rocket science to see where this country's going and who's in control of it. Really, if you look deep enough and do some research, isn't it a shame that you can't all get together under a common? I mean, basically, we all really want, you know, to try and
we all have a common interest in rectifying this, don't we?
Yes.
Nobody watching this program wants to see elderly people living in shop doorways or elderly people freezing to death because they can't eat and put their central heating. Nobody wants that.
I don't even want to hear people talk about it, Albert. Just hearing it coming from you is...
Everybody here wants to know that if a woman's got breast cancer, she go to the hospital and they'll give her whatever treatment is, irrespective of how much it costs, to make her better. Everybody wants that. Unfortunately, everybody's not sat in the Palace of Westminster, and we need to change the Palace of Westminster. Now, I'm doing the level best I can to use the law to get those changes brought in by trying to kick the police into doing their job, which is to uphold the law of this country to the best of their ability without favour, fear, malice or ill will. The new police oath I don't even bother with because it's treasonable. And I actually upset somebody a little while ago because I was talking at an EDL rally, and as we were walking back to the cars, talking to a young policewoman, and I said to her, I said, of course, you realise that you're impersonating a police officer? And she said, why? I said, well, on your oath, they've left out the words, our sovereign lady, before they put the Queen. And that, in fact, is to imagine the death of the Queen as a sovereign lady, because I took my oath to our sovereign lady, the Queen. So they're imagining her death as a sovereign lady. that is treason contrary to the 1351 Treason Act. Now, under the police regulations, you are not allowed to hold the office of constable if you have ever taken part, no matter how inadvertently, in an act of treason. So these young officers today have all inadvertently, because I don't suppose any of them particularly want to commit treason, they've all inadvertently taken part in an act of treason by swearing the oath. Hang on, my dogs are going ballistic. Go lay down. Lay down. Yeah, so, you know, they don't want to, but they've all taken part in this act of treason by swearing this treasonable oath. And therefore all of them, legally, are only impersonating a police officer. I have to say I'm waiting for a policeman to stop me and try and tell me that, you know, I've committed some road traffic offence so that I can arrest him for impersonating a police officer and see where that goes. But yeah, so I mean, basically, government are doing things to suit government, not to suit us. And my honest and considered opinion now is that this will eventually be sorted at the point of a gun. That is my honest opinion. I think that the population will arm themselves. I think that there are more than enough weapons out there. There are more than enough people who are qualified and trained to use those weapons. And I think that they will arm themselves. They will do it. And I was talking to a group of farmers in Oxfordshire one day, and one of them said to me, I said, well, you know, there's an awful lot of you boys are killing yourselves because you can't make ends meet, you can't see any way out of it. And they said, yeah, they said, but we're talking at the moment that when we get so bad that we're all likely to kill ourselves, we've decided we're going to go out in a blaze of glory. So there'll be 500 cars go to Parliament Square with 5 farmers in each car, and we will each go to the boot and we will take out a loaded shotgun. We will walk into Parliament and we will shoot everybody inside. Now that's 2,500 barrels. Well, it's 2,500 farmers. That's 5,000 barrels. Now, if you're the policeman on the gate and you're stood there with a Heckler and Koch and your 9mm Glock, and 2,500 people point 5,000 shotgun barrels at you, are you actually going to say you're not going past me? Because if they fire one of those barrels, every last bit of you is going to be blown into nothing. Because it would just be such total devastation on your body that there would be nothing left to bury. The road sweepers might get a bit, but that's it. So how many police officers are actually going to stand there and see that and actually say, you're not coming past me? What they will do is they'll hit the little button on their radio that demands urgent assistance, but by the time urgent assistance arrived, you'd have walked past them into Parliament and shot everybody in there.
Albert, remember about 10-20 minutes when you were talking about being upbeat and when you were imagining a bus going into a shop and that
Yeah.
The police that stand outside number 10, in your opinion, do you think they're prepared for that?
I don't think any of them are prepared to that, and it's just like I'm fully convinced that if you wanted to, you could say, for example, you wanted to get a particular part of London. You want to get into Westminster, right? You want to get into Downing Street. Then what do you do to get into Downing Street? You start a riot in somewhere like Brixton. All of the riot train police from all over London will be sent to Brixton. There'll be none spare to stop you going into Downing Street. You know, so you know, you have a diversion, don't you? And if you organise 3 or 4 diversions in different directions, there'd definitely be nobody left to go into Downing Street. You know, in which case you could go in there, take a JCB, just roll it through the gates, you know, go in there, or a heavy lorry, just roll it through the gates, and then just punch it straight through the front door of you know, if you've got a bucket on it, just push it straight through the front door of Downing Street, and you're inside, aren't you? You've got half a dozen policemen outside in the street, you've got a couple of policemen inside.
Yeah.
How are they going to stop you? How are they going to stop you putting two into Cameron's head? They're not. They're not.
Well, I think it's only been stopped now by fear, and if the people were to lose the fear, I wouldn't like to think what would be the case scenario.
Well, I mean, Cameron doesn't have anybody's respect, does he? You know, particularly after this thing came out in the book about him and the pig's head. You know, I mean, Cameron has nobody's respect in this country. When I write to him, I normally refer to him as the boy David. You know, and I've told him in one of my letters that he will have noticed that I hadn't used any of his titles, like Right Honourable, and this is because, in line with what oh God, who was the spy master for Elizabeth I? Walsingham. In line with what Walsingham said.
Yeah, Thomas Walsingham, that's right.
Yeah, Walsingham. When he said to the Duke of Norfolk that they just arrested for treason, and Norfolk turned around and said, "I'm Norfolk," and Walsingham turned around and said to him, "The dead have no titles." And I said to Cameron in my letter when I was finishing, "You will notice that I've not used any of your titles. This is because I intend to see you hang, and the dead have no titles."
That's right. I think Walsingham, Sussex, and two other earls in that conspiracy.
Well, Walsingham.
Sorry, no, Norfolk. Sorry, Norfolk, Sussex, and I can't...
yeah. That was the Earl of Essex with Sussex.
That's it. Yeah.
Yeah, the Earl of Essex. Now there's an example of the treason laws. Now, when I mean, for example, the Police Reform Act of 2002 allows the police to ask the IPCC to grant them a dispensation against investigating your complaint. Now, supposing you're a young woman, you're a nice looking young woman, and you're on your way home one night, you've been to a disco and you're on your way home, you're driving down the road and a car stops you, and it's a police car, and the policeman gets out and he's looking down the front of your very nice dress that you've got on and admiring the view, and then he puts his hand on you and you get upset by that, so you go to the police station, you put a formal complaint in that this officer sexually assaulted you. And I'm not saying that doesn't happen, because it might well do, but anyway, so you put your complaint in. That goes then to the complaints department, because the inspector in the police station takes your complaint. It's nothing to do with him. All he's doing is filling in a form and sending it off. When it gets to the complaints department, the officer in the complaints department actually knows the officer who's done the stop. They maybe joined the police together 20 years ago. They may have, you know, they may be regular, you know, partners at the wife swapping club. It doesn't matter, right? He knows. So he doesn't actually want to do anything about it. So he writes a letter to the IPCC asking them to grant a dispensation against investigating your offence on the grounds that the allegation is vexatious. Now, he doesn't give any evidence as to why it's vexatious, just that it's vexatious. And the IPCC dutifully rubber stamp that. So you then go back to the police station and you say, "What's happening about my complaint against this PC?" And they say, "Nothing, because we've got a dispensation, we don't have to investigate it." Now, dispensations are illegal under the Bill of Rights, for starters. But not only are they illegal under the Bill of Rights, it goes back much, much earlier than that. Because Elizabeth I demonstrated this, and it was outlined by a judge called Patterson in a case in 1860 something. And Judge Patterson actually outlined what it was, and that was that the king cannot grant a dispensation for a common law offence, right? Can't grant a dispensation for a common law offence. He can grant a dispensation for a statute offence. Now, obviously, when the officer puts his hand down in front of your dress, that is the statute offence under the Offences Against a Person Act of Indecent Assault. So he can grant a dispensation for that. However, he cannot grant a dispensation unless the king is the only victim. If a third party is involved, then the king cannot grant a dispensation. So when the IPCC grant this dispensation, they are actually doing something which the king can't do. So they are imagining the death of the king, or in this case the queen, by assuming a power that the queen doesn't have. Now Elizabeth I demonstrated this very well with the Earl of Essex, because when he lost his temper with her and he went to draw his sword and strike her, and everybody jumped on him before he could, she forgave him that treason, because that was treason. She forgave him that treason. But when he attempted to start a revolution and take over the country with a view to running the country himself, because that affected her subjects, she had his head off. So she demonstrated full well what was the law of England from the year dot, that if a third party, in fact, is involved, you can't grant dispensation. Now Patterson said this, and what he said was that if you own a bridge across a stream on your land, the king cannot give you a dispensation against maintaining that bridge in a usable, safe condition. Because if somebody walks across that bridge and is injured because of its unsafe condition, the king is preventing them from suing for damages, and that the king cannot do. So basically, if you have a claim where you could get damages of any kind for anything, and there can be no dispensation. So the IPCC, in point of fact, I think I'm going to write to them about this. The IPCC, by actually granting this dispensation, are actually placing themselves above the kings and queens of England by granting these dispensations, and granting a dispensation that they are not allowed by law to grant because it involves a third party.
Even when Parliament rules supreme, Albert?
It doesn't matter, because Parliament does not rule supreme. Parliament thinks it rules supreme. For example, let's take this thing that Parliament say about the blue-eyed babies. Parliament will claim, and they will tell you, that if they pass a law saying that all blue-eyed baby boys born in June have to be killed, that would be the law, and the police would have to go out and collect your babies, and they would have to be taken away and killed. Now, Chief Justice Sir Edward Coke in 1628 came up with this: that Parliament may sometimes pass a law which is repugnant, impossible to perform, and against common right and reason, in which case the common law will intercede and strike it down. Now, Parliament passed a law saying all blue-eyed baby boys had to be killed that were born in June, and you're the parent of a blue-eyed baby boy born in June. You are not going to surrender that baby to be killed without a fight, are you? So you're going to fight to protect your child, and your entire close family are going to fight with you to protect that child. All of your neighbours are going to come out and fight with you to protect that child, until the entire city is fighting with you to protect that child. That makes it impossible to perform. The law itself is repugnant, and it is against common right and reason.
It's not actually that far-fetched to imagine, though, Albert.
No,
I mean,
no.
especially the common purpose.
Right. So basically, everybody in London, for example, would think that law was repugnant. Everybody would think it was against common right and reason.
I'd like to think that that'd be the case, yeah.
And everybody, I'm talking about the English people now, everybody would in fact fight to defend that child or those children. There could be more than one blue-eyed baby born in London in June, right? So everybody would come out to fight them. There would be more people on the streets than the police have. So the police would find it impossible to enforce that law. And because Parliament is in London, it wouldn't take very long from the people from defending the babies to attack Parliament. And because Parliament has only got 600 and odd MPs in it, 635 I think is MPs, it's not going to take very long to throw the whole lot in the river, is it? So, you know, with a premise that if they manage to swim to a bank somewhere and climb out, they are never taking any part in public life again. Or next time you throw them in with a lump of concrete tied to them. But you know, so basically, the common law, at the will of the hands of the people, would prevent that law from being carried out. So Parliament are not supreme. They never have been supreme. Parliament are always answerable to the people. Now the problem is we've got into this party system because government worked very, very well when all members of Parliament were independent. Because you know you were elected for your place in Buckinghamshire or in Coventry or wherever to go to Parliament. You were elected and you went down to Parliament. You represent the views of the people who elected you. Now when you got to Parliament, somebody would be elected to be in charge, or the king of the day would select somebody and say, well, you know, I want you to be my prime minister, and they would then look around and say, well, I would like you and you and you, and make you all government ministers. But nobody belonged to a party, so there would be no whips, because the whipping themselves are illegal. Because the Bill of Rights says that all votes in Parliament should be free. But if you look at the votes in Parliament where they use the whips, you get the three-line whip. You're not free to decide what you want. You've got to vote with your party. If you don't vote with your party, they remove the whip from you, and you know, you lose all the perks of being in that party.
Yeah, I think as somebody's always, well, a quote is that you can't be more undemocratic when you're dealing with the whip's office, can it? I mean, it doesn't add up at all, does it? You know.
Well, no, it doesn't. But if all members of Parliament were independent, there would be no whips. Every vote would be on the members of Parliament's personal conscience as to how he was going to vote. For example, 90% of the people in this country would vote for the return of the death penalty for certain offences. I mean, when I talk about treason and I'd like to hang people, you'd be amazed how many people say, please can I have the job of public executioner? You know, because there is no shortage of people who'd be prepared to be public executioner. And so basically, what we want to do is we want to get things sorted out so that we run this country the way it ought to be run. We need to return all of the Queen's powers to her. I hate the word power. When I say powers, I hate the word power. All of the legitimate authority of the Crown should be returned to the Queen. All of the legitimate authority of the House of Lords should be returned to the House of Lords, and that means getting rid of all the life peers that these political parties have slung in there, and going back to the hereditary peers, and actually saying to the hereditaries, you know, we'd like you back. And if the hereditary says, well, I actually don't want to do it, then we say, okay, that's fine, but where is your son? And then you say to the son, right, you know, your dad's retiring from the peerage, you are now the Duke of whatever it is, you are now required to sit in Parliament. And I met an old Earl, he was in his 80s. When he came out of university, he got a job at the Foreign Office. And if he had, as a young member of the Foreign Office, he would be told, we've got to take this packet and it's got to be delivered to Liverpool. So you take it up to Liverpool. Now he got £5 a week wages. If he had to go to Liverpool, he had to pay his own train fare to Liverpool. If he had to stay overnight, he had to pay his own accommodation overnight. And when he came back and he's inherited the title, he went to the House of Lords, and all he got was a subsistence allowance, which meant that he got an allowance to cover the cost of his meals while he was working in Parliament. He didn't get a vast amount of money. And he turned up at the meeting that I was at, and he was wearing a very threadbare frock coat. You could see he had seen better days, but he came there wearing this very threadbare frock coat. And from his shoulders to his knees on both sides of this frock coat were decorations. I've never seen so many decorations. Bloody great stars everywhere, from his shoulders to his knees. And he said that when he entered Parliament in the House of Lords, he entered Parliament to help the ordinary people. And all the time he was in Parliament, he did what he thought was the best thing for the ordinary people, which meant turning down a lot of government legislation. And he did what he thought was the best thing. And he wanted to stay in the House of Lords, doing the job that he enjoyed doing, looking after the common man, because it was something he had done all his life, and he wanted to do that. And he was really hacked off that Tony Blair had thrown him out. What the House of Lords should have done, the hereditary period should have done with Tony Blair, is said, no, we're not leaving. We're absolutely refusing to leave. And when Tony Blair said, well, all right, I'll impose the Parliament Act, they should have gone to the Queen and said to the Queen, this is wrong. When the Parliament Act comes for you, insist that it is brought to you and don't give it the assent, because unless you agree to it, it can't happen. Because at the moment what happens is the House of Commons says, well, the House of Lords won't do this, so we'll wait for the year. Then we'll put it through under the Parliament Act. We just take it without the House of Lords say so to the Queen, and it will get the assent. Except they don't take it to the Queen anymore, because now it gets the automatic assent, which is given by a group of 5 peers selected by the government of the day, so you can guess which way they're going to vote, and they just rubber stamp it. And this is a system that was brought in by Henry VIII, because he didn't want to sign the death warrant for his wife. So because he wanted to duck shove responsibility for killing his wife, he picked 5 peers and said, right, I want you to examine the case and sign the warrant. But they all knew that if they didn't sign the warrant, chances are they would be losing their heads. So they signed the warrant to kill the Queen.
Yeah.
And this is you know, this is the thing that what we have in today, and I can't say it enough, is we have a total lack of moral courage in this country today.
Oh, indeed. Albert, before Stav steps in, what's your thoughts on the new, well, not so new, but came out in April, the Criminal Justice and Courts Act 2015, where it basically puts a price on justice and...
Well, my view on justice and the law is that the law should apply to everyone equally, and it should be free. You know, you cannot allow courts to come along and say, well, you know, we'll hear your case, but it's going to cost you £5,000 in court costs or whatever. You know, you can't do that. I mean, I don't know if you've ever heard of a woman called Elizabeth Beckett.
I guess I haven't, no, but I guess they could do that if it's attached with it, Section 26, to buy the people to have it, yeah?
Yeah, but Elizabeth Beckett got a council tax bill. Now, her father had been a High Court judge in India. He was English, and he was a lawyer, and he was a High Court judge in India. But they were administering English law in India at the time. And when he died, she inherited his big judge's house, which he bought, which was a proper manor house up in Cumbria. And really big house, I'll tell you, a massive house. Anyway, she inherited that, and she got a council tax bill, and she sat down and she looked at it, and there was a little bit on this council tax bill, something like £56 going to the regional authority. So she paid a council tax bill in full, minus the £56. They came back to her and they said, well, you haven't paid this £56, you owe us this £56. And she said, no, I'm not paying it. I have no say over the regional authority. I didn't want it. I don't want it. I have no say in who sits on it or what it does or anything else. And there's no taxation without representation, so I'm not paying that £56. So they sued her for council tax. The little old lady in a wheelchair wheels herself into court and trashed the council solicitor. So the next year, she didn't pay it again. So now they sue her for 2 lots. And this time they go out and they hire a decent solicitor. The little old lady wheels herself into court and trashes the decent solicitor.
Yeah, I have heard of that story. I just didn't know the lady's name.
And this happened every year for 12 years. And by the time, at the end of the 12 years, the council were employing a QC. And she's gone in and she's trashed the QC. And then the QC turned around and he said to the judge, and I really don't know what the hell the judge was thinking about, had she paid the council tax demand when she asked, because the judge had ordered the council not to prosecute her again. She'd won so many times that it was harassment to keep on at her, and they were not allowed to prosecute her again. So the barrister said, well, had she not withheld the council tax on this issue for 12 years, the council would not have run up the bill of taking this case of £20,000, which is what it cost them to hire a QC. And therefore, the council wanted to claim the £20,000 off of Elizabeth Beckett. And for some inexcusable and inexplicable reason, the judge awarded costs of £20,000 against Elizabeth Beckett. Now that meant Elizabeth was going to have to sell her house. So Elizabeth was a bit devastated about that, because it was her home and she liked it, and it was where she lived. Within 2 weeks, by public subscription, the £20,000 had been paid. Within 2 weeks, because Elizabeth Beckett was basically a national hero to the movement, really. But she used real law. And what is so annoying is you see people going to court today, representing themselves, demanding that their case be heard under common law, when council tax is administrative law, and the court will only hear a case under the law that is put forward under, and that is the council suing you under administrative law, so that's the only law the court will hear. And basically making a right pig's ear of it, and then claiming when they lose that it's a corrupt court and a corrupt judge, which frankly is ludicrous. They lost because they were being stupid, not because the judges were corrupt or the courts were corrupt. It's just ridiculous. It's like when you see police officers serving warrants and they sit there and they look at it and they say, oh, where is the wet signature? This is not a proper warrant. It's where is the wet signature? It doesn't need a wet signature. When the court issued a warrant, the judge signs it with a wet signature, probably with a ballpoint pen, I might add, but it then goes into the warrants office. The warrants office then fax it to the relevant police station to go out and make the arrest. The policeman only at best ever sees the fax. If he stops you in the street and he hasn't got the warrant on you, and he name checks you and it comes back that there is a warrant out for your arrest, the police officer who hasn't got the warrant on him will arrest you under the terms of the warrant. But he hasn't got it. Whether it's got a wet or a dry signature or any other kind of bloody signature, he hasn't got it. But he will arrest you on it.
I've seen cases, or a case,
it's a good arrest,
where a police officer's printed it from at the back of his car.
Yeah, because it's all computerized.
Yeah.
It's all computerized.
Isn't there a danger here with fraud now? Massive fraud by corporations who can write their own right?
Well,
And the other fact is, Albert, whether people disagree with that or not, and I follow what you're saying, but they're done at these bulk centres now, rubber stamped in the hundreds, and they're not individually heard, which is against the law, is it not?
well, absolutely, absolutely. But I mean, if you can prove that, then what you do is you take the thing to the police and you ask them to bring a prosecution for perverting the course of justice. You see, there are always ways around it. As I was telling you earlier before we came on air, with child stealing by the state, which is an awful lot of stuff on the internet about that. And I said to a couple who had two beautiful children who were well looked after and well loved, and obviously the kids loved mum and dad to pieces, because I knew the family before it happened, and social services wanted their kids for some inexplicable reason. They said they weren't thriving. I've never seen kids who were thriving so well. I mean, absolutely marvellous, these kids. And the mum spoke to me and she said to me, she said, oh, I'm a bit worried about this, don't know what to do about it. And I said, well, have you got anything from social services in writing which you can prove 100% is not true? And she said, absolutely, I've got quite a few bits. I said, well, we'll take them to the police and tell them you want to report the social worker who signed them for issuing a false instrument contrary to Section 8 of the 1981 Counterfeiting and Forgery Act. And she didn't do that. She wrote to social services and she said, look, if you persist in this, I'm going to report you to the police for issuing a false instrument contrary to this law. And by return, she got a letter from social services saying, we're not interested in your kids. We don't want to know. Because issuing a false instrument is what's classed as a major crime. And you go to prison if you're over 21 for 5 years on a first offence if you're over 21. Most social workers are over 21. And they're using a law against you, but there is always a law that will counter their law. And I had this with my daughter. She phoned me up and said, Dad, social services want to interview Logan, which is my grandson. And I said, really, why? She said, well, I don't know. They won't tell me why, but they said they want to interview him on their own. I said, are they there? She said, yeah. I said, put them on. She put the social worker on, a young woman. And she said to me, she said, well, we're going to interview him. I said, well, if you take him and interview him, I'll have it stopped with a little man with a blue pointed hat on his head, because what you're doing is illegal. Because under the Bill of Rights, under the 1984 Police and Criminal Evidence Act, the rule is that the child must have a responsible adult, and that responsible adult must, if possible, be the parent. Now, if the parent is unsuitable, then you need another irresponsible adult. I said, so I will come and be the responsible adult. And she said, no, it doesn't work like that. So I said, well, if it doesn't work like that, then I will have it stopped by a policeman. And so she put me on to her boss at the office, and her boss at the office said to me, no, he said, you can't do that. I said, I can. The 1984 Police and Criminal Evidence Act says I can. And he said to me, he said, yeah, but the 1996 Children and Young Persons Act says that we can do this. And I said, in the 2002 Police Reform Act, which, as you know, I hate, is an amends the 1984 Police and Criminal Evidence Act, so it's still current. You are not allowed to interview a minor without a responsible adult present. Now, I'm prepared to come in and be that adult, but you're not interviewing my grandson without a responsible adult. It should be his mother or his father, but it certainly isn't going to be done without a responsible adult there. And it was agreed that I could go in and interview him. So I went into London. My daughter lives in Camden. I went into London and I took him to the council offices, and the social worker said, why are you doing this? I said, because I'm not having you put words into my grandson's mouth. Now, if you're asking him questions and I don't like them, I will stop you. We'll go outside and we'll discuss what I don't like, and you will change your mind. And if you don't stop asking questions I don't like, then I will take my grandson and I will go home and we'll terminate the interview. And the net result was they interviewed him, and he said, "Can I play with that toy?" She said, answer a few more questions, and you can. He said, "I'm not answering any more questions unless I can now." So they had to give him the toy, and he answered all the questions. The net result is my daughter still has my grandson. You know, because there are ways and means of doing these things, but people get upset and they don't understand the law, and this is the major thing. They do not understand the law of this country, and people like social workers are able to break the law with virtual impunity because they don't understand it, you know. Whereas if you understand about false instruments, you can cop the social workers every time, you know, because you can normally prove that what they've written is wrong, and that means they've committed a major crime, and they can go to prison. And the first social worker that goes to prison, the first police officer who goes to prison, in fact, is going to find that they are sending a shot across the bows of every other social worker and every policeman in the country. Because there is a tendency for social services to actually, and youth and community department of the police, to have a very sort of an incestuous relationship, because they always work together, and you know, they know one another on first name terms, and you know, so they agree. If you want something written, yeah, I'll write that for you, and it gets sorted like that. But I mean, basically, it shouldn't. So you take it to another policeman and you report them for issuing a false instrument and get a lot arrested.
I'm not sure if Stav's wanting to say something.
Well, again, it comes down to people knowing what they're really talking about, or knowing the law, which I think if we all had Albert Burgess heads on our shoulders, then perhaps things would be a lot more different today. But like I say, a lot of people feel they don't wake up to the fact that they're being forced to do this extra work. They haven't got time. They keep their head down. They can't think about this. They haven't got time to look at this. They can't, and they're basically imprisoning themselves with more and more of this to come, because when do people just, what is it, wake up is the expression, really, I guess.
Yeah, but I mean,
It's about remedy at the end of the day, and they can never really take that away from us. There will always be a way.
well, it's what I said earlier. There's always an English law which will get you out of trouble. You can always find an English law that will get you out of trouble. The problem is, knowledge is a weapon. Most people can't bother to read the books that contain the knowledge. But if they do read the books that contain the knowledge, well, knowledge is a weapon, and you know, you are always going to be able to get that knowledge, and you're going to be able to use it. And people, you know, say to me, "Aren't you frightened of being arrested?" And I say, "No, I'm not." The reason I know I'm not frightened of being arrested is because I know damn well that any policeman interviewing me, I can run the rings round him on the law. Because I don't care how he is or what he is, he doesn't know as much law as I do. And the reason he doesn't know as much law as I do is because he's been brought up on how to deal with motor car offences and things like that, and you know, stabbings and whatever. But he's not been brought up on the intricacies of common and constitutional law. And you know, they because of that. The thing is, if they say, for example, I've never, you watch these police stop programs, don't you? The fly on the wall police programs.
Yeah.
Well, I've never ever seen a lawful stop and search in the street on one of those programs. If I want to stop you and search you, I have to say to you, "Excuse me, sir, the reason I've stopped you is because I have proposed to search you. The reason I propose to search you is I have a belief that you have something on you, which can be a drug, it can be weapons, whatever, which is a prohibited item, and I propose to search you for that item," right? And I then tell you, my name is Albert Burgess, my shoulder number is Quebec Kilo 5119, and I am at Holston Police Station. If you would like to go into Holston Police Station at any one time, in the next year, you can have a copy of the record of the search. What I normally did actually was I normally took a carbon sheet and I would just write the thing out with a carbon, because it's already carbonated on one page. So I'd take the next 2 pages and carbonate it and then tear out the page and give it to them then, so they walk away from me with a copy. But it has to be within 1 year at a police station if you're following the law the way it's written. Once I've done all of that, then I can search you. But how many times you see on these police stop programs, a policeman walks up to a kid in the street, throws him up against the wall and says, right, turn your pockets out.
All the time.
They're not that quick. The first thing that they do say is, have you got any sharps on you?
Yeah.
That comes first.
So none of them are complying with the law. It's just like I've never seen a proper drink drive test given in the street.
No, me. I wish I had your confidence when you were.
If you're driving your car down the road and a policeman stops you and he suspects you to be driving whilst having consumed intoxicating liquor, what he has to say to you is, because I suspect you to have been driving a motor vehicle on a public place, on a road or other public place, having consumed intoxicating liquor, I require you to take a breath test. If he just says to you, as they do on these police stop programs, right sir, I've stopped you and I want you to blow into this, the breath test is not legal. If it comes back positive, instant, you're going to blow over 100 in the police station. But you get down the police station and the policeman says, the sergeant says to the policeman, what have you got, George? He says, well, I stopped this gentleman in the high street driving a motor vehicle, registration so and so and so and so. I required him to take a breath test or whatever. And at which point you say, hang on a minute, you never required me to do anything. You just told me to blow into this. At which point the sergeant should release you, because the breath test was unlawful. The arrest and detention are unlawful because the breath test was unlawful. And you should walk out of the police station, thank your lucky stars, and get the bus home. I've never seen legal stop and search or legal drink drive tests done on these fly on the wall programs. And we're talking about English policing now, not continental or anybody else, just the English. Never seen one. Even when they're conducted by traffic policemen. I've never seen one.
Would be if it was taken to court and thrown out on that, would that come under a technicality?
Well, of course it's a technicality, but it's a major technicality that's going to get you released.
Yeah, well, you see, some people look on that when they say, oh, he only got off on a technicality, like if it was whimsical or whether it was...
yeah, it doesn't matter, does it? The policeman's not doing his job properly. Of course you're going to get off in a technicality. Yeah. It's about far better that you should get... people should get off on a technicality than that people who are innocent should be convicted. You know,
it's like Albert, that before court can actually do anything with you in the court, they have to get jurisdiction.
Well,
or they have to substantiate jurisdiction.
Well, it's just a nonsense, isn't it? All this jurisdiction nonsense. It's just a nonsense. If I'm a policeman on the street, I have jurisdiction to do an awful lot of things, or at least let's leave the jurisdiction. I have an authority to do an awful lot of things given to me by the law. Now, if I stop you in the street, I have an authority to talk to you. If I suspect, as a result of talking to you, that you may have something on you that you shouldn't have because of your nervous behaviour or whatever, then that gives me an authority to have reasonable grounds to suspect you've got something, and I can search you. Now, this happened a few years back. 2 police officers, traffic policemen, they stopped a car, an estate car, spoke to the driver. The driver was extremely nervous, so they said to him, well, okay, because you're so nervous, we have reasonable grounds to believe you have something in the car that you shouldn't have, and so we propose to search the vehicle and you to look for prohibited substances or stolen property. What they actually found was 200 weight heroin in the boot. So you know, it's not why they stopped him, but the way he responded to the police, the way he dealt with the police, that gave them the grounds to do something. And it depends upon the policeman that you get as to how they will react under certain circumstances. I mean, I stopped a car one night, 11:30, up in Islington High Street. He just turned left where he shouldn't, and I stopped him, and a young 35-year-old black guy got out of the car and started ranting and raving at me about I'd only stopped him because he was black. And I waited for him to run out of steam, and I said to him, do you remember exactly what part of the road your car was in when I stepped out in front of you? And he said yes. And I said, right, well, I'm going to give you 5 cars. You tell me which cars they to stop when they reach that point, and you tell me the colour of the driver. And he never got it right once. So I said, are you now satisfied that I did not stop you because of the colour of your skin? He said, well, I don't have anything, you know, any argument to that, do I? I said, okay, so when I sit down and I write you out this fixed penalty ticket for failing to give precedence to a road traffic sign, you're not going to argue, are you? And he said, what can I say? You know, you're the first policeman that's ever taken the trouble to prove to me that you didn't stop me because I was black. He said, so I've got to accept the ticket. And I said, well, okay, well, I wasn't ever going to give you a ticket. I'm just going to give you words of advice. And I'm not going to allow your attitude to me to change my mind on that. So I will advise you that the road signs are there for you to obey, because they are there to save lives, yours included. Obey them in future. Good night. And I walked away and left him drive off. But I mean, a lot of police officers would react differently to that. And you know, it's just the luck of the draw as to what sort of policeman you get, I suppose.
Well, does a policeman have that? I mean, because in that case, you might just be a generally nervous person, right? You just don't like it.
Well, in which case, the search of the car is going to find nothing, is it?
So are you saying a person can give consent by the body language?
No, I'm not saying they give consent at all. They don't have any. They don't give any consent whatsoever.
So you've not gained jurisdiction from that person.
No, they're nonsense. You don't need to. As a police officer, you have an authority granted to you by the law to take certain actions if you have reasonable grounds for believing that certain things are occurring.
But now, didn't you say in that particular instance that your reasonable grounds came from that person being nervous?
Well, I would say that the reasonable grounds would come if I'd wanted to go the whole hog and search him and give him a ticket and all the rest of it. The reasonable grounds would come from his belligerent attitude to me, yes. But I mean,
some people would have a problem with that, Albert.
Well, they can have a problem with it, but it's not illegal, and I'm not doing anything wrong. The fact is that a lot of people they get these silly ideas, and a lot of it comes from the free man on the land movement, where they talk about things like jurisdiction and all the rest of it. Do you have jurisdiction? The short answer is a police officer has tremendous jurisdiction because he has tremendous authority under the law. There is nobody with more authority under the law than the ordinary constable walking the beat, because he can go anywhere he likes and he can do anything he likes so long as he is complying with the law. And it's like, for example, if I chase somebody down the road and they run into their house, right? Because I'm chasing them down the road and they run into the house, I have an authority under the law to kick the door down and go in after him, because I'm chasing him for an offence, right? Now, if I'm trying to stop a car and he drives off, and I can send a police car to his home address because I've got his registration, so we do that and we send a police car to the home address.
Can I just stop you, Albert? When you say you're chasing him for an offence, so he's guilty at this point, yeah?
Well, no, he's not guilty of the offence. I have reasonable grounds for believing that he just stabbed the guy he stabbed in the stomach, yes. Right? So I have reasonable grounds for believing that he has committed that offence. Whether I've seen it or somebody else has told me that he's seen it. Right? So I have reasonable grounds for believing he's committed the offence. That allows me to pursue him. if he runs into his house, it allows me to go into that house to continue the pursuit.
But do you not have to see the injured party, the victim in this, before you can make that decision?
Well, it helps
It's
if I
just it's
can,
just
but
hearsay
the short,
at this point.
no, no. But the short answer is no, I don't, because if somebody runs out of a house and somebody else is, somebody else comes to the door screaming, "Stop him! Stop him! He's just stabbed my husband!" Right? Then I am going to try and stop him, aren't I? And if he runs off, then I'm going to chase him. And if I chase him and he runs into a house down the road, then I am going to actually kick the door of that house in and go in and get him.
But that
Because
could be used against you though, Albert, because somebody
no,
could create
no,
an instance where they've got you running after somebody into a property where you're going to put yourself at
no,
risk.
no, it can't, because I have reasonable grounds from the
Yeah,
fact.
but this person who's told you this information is making it up, for
Yeah,
instance.
it doesn't matter. I still
Trying to
am.
set you up.
I still have reasonable grounds for doing what I'm doing.
I know you do,
And
but I'm trying to point out the fact that that could work against you by
no,
somebody.
it can't. No, it can't work against me at all. The most that's going to happen is that the police are going to pay for a new door. So,
No, I'm not talking. You're missing the point that I'm trying to get to, Albert. What I'm saying is, say if a woman was to say to you, "Can you chase him because he stabbed somebody?" You haven't seen this person, so you're just going on what this lady's telling you. So you're now chasing this guy into a property where once you're in that property, there's a bunch of guys all ready to cause harm on you. Now, this woman who told you that made it all up. She just wanted
well,
to get. She just wanted to get you
if,
into the property.
if I'm chasing somebody, I'm also talking on the talking brooch, and I'm talking to other police officers, and I'm telling them where I'm going and why, and where I am. And
Right.
other police officers automatically will gravitate to that area. So when I go into the house, I'll say I'm at 35 Acacia Avenue and I'm going in. Everybody knows I'm at 35 Acacia Avenue. So they're going to come along and they're going to go in as well. So, and they're going to be pretty well behind me, because they do, when an officer's chasing, they do all get there fairly quickly. So they're going to be pretty well behind me. So the chances of me actually getting hurt badly by the people in the house are fairly remote, I have to say.
They are, Albert, but going back to that time where I don't know the ladies' names, but with the grenade incident, yeah, you probably know this more better than me. Was it two officers that were injured and killed through a grenade attack not so long back?
Yeah.
Yeah. What about a situation like that then? Because you'd say it's quite
Well,
remote.
well,
That
you
happened.
you pays your money, you takes your choice, don't you? Really, it's one of those things. But I mean, I went to a call one night, and a woman there, woman of 35, very attractive, very slim, very fit-looking woman, alleged that she'd been raped. So I whistled up a police car to take her to the rape suite, and then I said to her as she was getting in the police car, "Do you know who did this to you?" And she said, "Yes, it was that guy over there," and she pointed me at a guy over the road. So I got her off in the police car. I walked over the road and I took one look at the bloke, and I thought, no way, no way at all has this guy raped her. He was in his late 60s. He was grossly, and I mean grossly, overweight. He was very emphysemic. The only thing fatter than him was his dog, and they were both waddling down the road together. But I've got to do it. I mean, she's told me that he's raped her, so I've got to deal with it. So I said to him, I said, "Look, I wonder, sir, if you mind coming down to the police station, because I need you to help me with an inquiry." And he said, "What's it about?" I said, "Well, I've had an allegation that you raped a young woman." And he said, "Well, I didn't, so I'm not going." And I said, "Well, let me put it this way to you. I'm asking you ever so nicely if you will come to the police station and assist me with my inquiries. If you come to the police station, you're entitled to free legal advice, but you don't have to say anything unless you want to, and you can leave when you like." And he said, "Well," I said, "but if you say no, you leave me no option, because I've got the allegation. I've got to arrest you, in which case you can come to the police station with me," which you will do. You don't have to say anything unless you wish to. You're entitled to free legal advice, but you can't go home when you want to." And he said, "Well, put like that, I'll come with you." So we went down the police station, whistled up a car and got him down the police station. And I walked up into the CID office, and the CID officer sergeant said to me, he said, "Where's your prisoner?" I said, "I haven't got a prisoner, but a man's come in willingly to help me with the inquiry." He says, "A rape allegation." He said, "Go and arrest him." And I said, "Look, I don't believe that I can do that." And he said, "Why?" I said, "Well, I've seen the victim and I've seen the man. I don't believe it's physically possible for this man to have raped this woman. I mean, just physically not possible." And I said, "So because I don't believe it's physically possible, I don't have reasonable grounds to arrest him. But he has come in perfectly happily to assist with the inquiry." So he said to me, he said, "Go and arrest him." And I said, "No." He said, "That's an order." I said, "It's unlawful because I don't believe I have the grounds to arrest him because I don't believe he's capable of the offence."
But isn't this thought policing, Albert?
Isn't this what?
Is that not thought policing?
What do you mean, thought policing?
I remember we had a discussion about this a while back now, where we got into that. I don't know if Stav can remember it.
Well, you're making it. I mean, I guess really.
The reasonable ground is coming from your opinion in most incidents that you're speaking of. I mean,
yeah, but that is the only thing that I can use, isn't it? It's my opinion, my eyes.
People will say that there has to be. You've got law, have you not? If you don't need, if jurisdiction comes through your law and use of that, then where is it within that? What gives you the ability to have a reasonable ground in the first place?
Well, I didn't believe I had reasonable grounds, but on the other hand, I've got an allegation I've got to investigate, and because I've got to investigate the allegation, I have to take him down to the police station. There's two ways of doing that. I can ask him nicely if he'd like to come down and help me, or I can arrest him. Either way is okay. You know, I would just take the way that's not going to see the man arrested. Anyway, the sergeant ordered somebody else to arrest him, so they did, which pissed him off mightily, I have to say. It pissed me off as well. But after interviewing the woman at 10 o'clock in the morning, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and for doing that for 3 days, at the end of the third day, she admitted to the women police officers who were arresting her, who didn't like her story any more than I did, to be honest, that she admitted to them that she'd been out with the girls on the juice all night, didn't want to tell her husband that she'd been out with the girls all night, and so she thought he would wear it better if she said she'd been raped. So, you know, what really annoyed me was the fact that nobody actually arrested her for malicious prosecution or for wasting police time.
Yeah, I know what you're saying, where you've only got really your experience and your common sense, but just imagine in that scenario if you was wrong to go with that decision and this guy did in fact rape her. Well, wouldn't that look bad on you because you took the side of a male against the...
No, it would be, I would simply justify it by saying that I looked at the man, I'd met the woman, I'd seen the woman. As far as I was concerned, the man was perfectly incapable of overcoming her. She could have pushed him over and run. And he wouldn't have been able to do anything because of his physical condition. So, you know, I mean, policing is about common sense, or it should be. It should be about common sense. And 90% of the things you come across are a common sense thing that you do. You take the common sense way. Now, you use the law as a guide, but it's largely a common sense thing, and every constable is responsible for his own actions. So, yes, if you get it wrong, you've got it wrong, but that's not the end of the world, is it? You know, it's very far from the end of the world, and
Yeah.
you know, there's always somebody else.
I had the understanding that police officers are to remain impartial. To a point where I always thought that if you wanted to arrest me, for example, that I don't have a choice. I can't talk myself out of it. I've got to go to that station with you because, you know, somebody's made an allegation. That's you know, how I viewed it. But you're telling me that that's not the case.
But then you see, if I had you in the same circumstances, then I would look at you and I'd say, well, it's quite possible this man could have raped her because of his build, because of his age, because of this, that, and the other.
If I was in the same situation as the guy who you let off in that time,
Well, I
then
didn't let him off.
no, no, he didn't, because he did say another officer charged him, but you wasn't prepared to arrest this person at the time, was you?
And no, I wasn't. And in fact, it turned out that I was right to do that because the guy wasn't guilty. She made up the whole story.
Yeah.
So it turns out that I was right to do that. But you see, each officer is responsible for his own actions. And if you make an arrest, you have to be able to justify that arrest. And I couldn't justify that. I could justify it to the sergeant. I've had an allegation this guy raped this woman, so I've arrested him on suspicion of rape, right? I could justify that to the sergeant, no problem. What I can't do is justify it to me.
But how can you be impartial though at the same time? Don't you struggle with that? Do you find that difficult?
It's got nothing to do with being impartial or anything else. It's got to do with, do I look at this guy? Do I think this man, in his current physical state, is
Yeah, I
capable
buy that. I buy that,
of
Albert.
raping
But
this woman?
what I'm saying is, I didn't see that you would have to even need to go down that route, because you've got this person putting in this allegation, and that's pretty much all you need to make an arrest. Is that not how it goes then?
Well,
You can actually
no. They tell you at the training school that you shouldn't you shouldn't actually just believe everything that's told to you, because
Right, I'm with you.
you're a policeman. People will lie to you, and I mean this this happens quite a lot, and you go to places, and I mean I was going home one night at 2:30 in the morning, and I saw a woman slumped in a doorway with a bottle on her lap. And my first thought was drunk again. And I got 200 yards down the road in the car, and I thought, no, she looked ill. So I went back, got out of the car, walked over to her, and on her lap she had a milk bottle in her hand. But on her lap she had 2 tablet bottles, one of which I could see was completely empty, the other one had the lid off. And I'm immediately thinking, place of safety, suicide arrest. And I said to her, are you all right, darling? And she looked at me and she didn't say anything. And I said, are you okay, my love? And she looked at me and still didn't say anything. So I opened up my jacket, because I've got the uniform underneath. And I said, I'm a police officer, darling. Are you okay? And she said, I've just set fire to my husband. And I said, oh, really? And why did you do that? And she said, well, he beat me and he kicked me and he won't do that again. And I said to her, where's your husband now? And she said, he's in number whatever it is, Tubbs Road. So I'm thinking to myself, well, she's completely mad. At which point, 2 fire engines went whipping past me down Tubbs Road. So I walked to the corner, and sure enough, the house was on fire, 80 foot of flame coming out the roof. It was well alight. So I walked down, saw a fireman, and said, look, can you get onto your control? Because I didn't have a phone on me. Can you get onto your control to get onto my control? So I asked them to get a police car to meet me at the end of the road, because I have the lady who says she set fire to this lot. And of course, everybody loves a good fire. They all love a good fire. Any of you girls out there that are watching this, if you've ever been attacked, do not shout help, do not shout rape, do not shout murder. All of that is grief. Nobody wants to get involved in grief. Shout fire as loud and as often as you can. Everybody will come out for miles around to actually see this nice fire, and we will have so many witnesses about your attack. It's untrue. So shout fire. Everybody loves a good fire. All the police cars went whipping past me, and when I got fed up waiting for one to come to me, I put her in my car, drove her down the road, and called over a WPC who was warming her hands at the fire, and told her I'd got the lady who said she'd set fire to this lot. And she said to her, what's your name? She said, oh, Kathleen Murphy. She said, well, I'm arresting you for arson with intent to endanger life. Not why did you do it, or any of the other questions that a policeman's supposed to ask you before he makes the arrest. And 10 months later, we were at Crown Court, and they had a woman judge, I think it was Butler Sloss, and we were standing in for another judge who'd gone sick. And we got there, and the barrister said to me, can you explain the difference between a special constable and a regular policeman for for the jury? So I said, yes, special constable has all the duties, obligations, responsibilities and authority of a regular officer. He just doesn't get paid. It's purely voluntary. And then I sort of opened my arms up and I said, because if you'd like to pay me, I'd be only too happy to accept it, which brought the court down and got some funny looks from the judge. And then whose glasses had gone from this to this as she looked over the top of them. And then he said to me, "You didn't arrest my client." And I said, "No, I didn't." He said, "Why didn't you arrest me? Why didn't you arrest her? She told you she'd set fire to her husband." I said, "Yes, she did." He said, "You didn't arrest her." I said, "No, they told me at the training school a simple admission of guilt is not sufficient to make an arrest. You need something else." So he said to me, he said, "But you didn't arrest her." I said, "No." He said, "Did you consider arresting her?" And I said, "I considered it, yes." He said, "What for?" I said, "A place of safety. I was looking at a seriously depressed woman." And he sort of said to me, "What medical," and I could see qualifications have you got coming. And I put my hand out as I was stopping a car and I said, "Stop right there. I was married for 13 years to a woman who suffered severe premenstrual detention and depression. She was homicidal and suicidal. Believe me, I know a depressed woman when I see one." Now the judge's glasses were like this, looking over the top of their glasses. Then he said to me, "But you didn't arrest my client." And I said, "No, I didn't." And he said, "But she told you she'd set fire to her husband." And I looked at him and I said to him, "This is neither the time nor the place to start teaching you the law. But it is not necessarily an offence to set fire to your husband. If you genuinely believe that your life is at risk, and if you genuinely believe that the only way to preserve your own life is to actually set fire to your husband whilst he's asleep, that is not necessarily a criminal offence, and is precisely the reason we have juries to work that one out." By now, the judge's glasses were like this, looking over the top of her at me. But it was like every member of the jury who was slumped there, all of a sudden they were sat bolt upright. It was just as if somebody had tied strings to their heads like puppets and yanked them up. And they stayed upright for the rest of the trial. Now, 14 police officers gave evidence against the lady. The fire brigade and the forensic people gave evidence against the lady. She stood up on the dock and admitted what she had done, and the jury found her not guilty. They'd nullified the law for arson with intent to endanger life. In her case, they'd nullified the law. The jury did that. And it was a unanimous jury decision. And when the jury foreman gave the decision, she was stood there, and you could see she was thinking she was going to prison for a long time. You could see it in her face. She was going to prison for a long time. And when she stood there, and her friend ran across the courtroom and grabbed her up in a big hug and said, "Come on, you're free, you can go, you can go." And she was led out of the dock, and she really did not believe it was happening. But to see a jury suddenly yanked by the hair and sat bolt upright, it was magic, I tell you.
That's a great story. Can you still get the same jury today, though, Albert?
I think it depends entirely upon what you're doing. I mean, I've always been very good in court with courts and juries, and I've never lost in a case in a court. I've always come out with the result I wanted. Now, I didn't arrest the woman, and I didn't think that she should have been arrested, because I don't think the officer had asked for enough questions to justify the arrest. But nevertheless, if her husband had beaten her and he was kicking her, then I think that you could justify her actions on the basis that she's trying to save herself. But as I say, it's a responsibility of the jury to decide that. It's not my job to decide that. It's the jury. All I can do is give my evidence the best way that I can. And I mean, the judge, I was surprised. The judge never actually said a word to me the whole time. But the woman was acquitted, so I thought that was a fair, good, and a right decision to make, really.
Yeah, excellent. So I take it that she went on to live quite a good life after that, then?
Well, I don't know what happened to her after that, because her friends, there was another woman, her friend said, "Come on, you're coming back to my place. You can't go home, so you're coming back to my place. You can stay with me." So I never saw her again after that. Although I might well have done, because she lived exactly opposite my ex-wife, who I used to go and see normally normally to see the kids and that. But she lived in the same road. A friend lived in the same road, but I never ever saw her again.
But that experience still stays with you today.
Well, it's just, you know, you when you're policing, you get lots of little stories, and you know, some.
I mean, I wasn't against policing, Albert. I was just trying to establish a balance.
No, what I found was disheartening was the fact that we had a case where a bloke threw his girlfriend off the fourth floor of a block of flats and impaled her on the railings, and I was dealing with her, trying to revive her, and they went upstairs. There were 5 men in the room, all of whom were pretty drunk, and the officers went in the room and said, who threw her off the balcony, and everybody was deaf, dumb and blind, and then the officer said, right, I'm arresting you all on suspicion of murder, at which point 4 of them turned around and pointed at the 5th one and said it was him. So he was arrested and went to court and at the Old Bailey, and I was told we had the 2 best barristers in the country, one for the prosecution, one for the defence, and you know, if these were the best barristers in the country, believe me, we are in dire straits, because you've never seen such 2 doddery old fools in your life. And this barrister stood up, and because the guy admitted manslaughter on the grounds that he was diminished responsibility because he was 5 times the blood level to drive a car of alcohol. His barrister stood up and he said, in mitigation, he said, oh, my client is really mortified at what has happened because he really loved this girl. He really loved her. And he's so mortified that not a drop of alcohol has passed his lips in the 10 months since this happened. And the judge is swallowing all this nonsense. And I'm tempted to stand up and say, what are you talking about? He's been in bloody Brixton for 10 months on remand. How is he going to get alcohol? But the judge swallowed it all. And because he admitted manslaughter, and the judge said if he admits manslaughter, I'm going to give him a top of the range manslaughter punishment. If he denies manslaughter and denies murder and he's found guilty of murder, I'm going to give him a top of the range murder punishment. Well, I mean, let's be fair about this. Top of the range murder punishment is life in prison. Top of the range manslaughter punishment is 10 years in prison. So if you get 10 years, you'll be out in 5 on good behaviour.
Yeah.
You're going for life, and it's life, isn't it? But you're going to serve at least 10 years, probably 15, then you're going to be out. So basically, he cut his losses, didn't he? He's going to prison anyway. So he admitted manslaughter. He got 9 years in prison, so he's going to be out in 4.5. So at the back of the courtroom, of course, was his girlfriend's parents, who were crying their eyes out, absolutely crying their eyes out. But you see, people get hardened, don't they? When I went to the hospital with the girl, and they pronounced life extinct because the bottoms of, we couldn't inflate her lungs, because we found out at the hospital that the bottoms had been ripped out of her lungs by the railings, and they just wouldn't inflate. Yeah, anything we were blowing in was going straight out through the bottoms, and so we couldn't inflate her lungs, so we couldn't actually save her life whatever happened, because the surgeon said to me afterwards that even if he'd been stood there with a full operating staff, they would have lost her, because by the time they got around to doing anything for her, she would have been dead anyway, brain dead anyway. Yeah. So we couldn't have saved her, but you know, her parents, when we took her down to the mortuary, because you have to go there for continuity of evidence, and we took her down to the mortuary, and the 2 porters who picked her up, one picked her up by the legs, one by the arms, and they swung her across from one trolley onto another to go into the tray, and bashed her head on the trolley. And I said to me, be careful. And the porter turned around and said, that's all right, mate, she can't feel it. I said, no, but you bloody well will when you hit the wall of my cell. That's evidence and I only want the marks on that evidence that were put there by the person who killed her. I'm not interested in yours. And if you know, I will arrest you. Believe me, I will arrest you. You treat her with respect. And you know, but people get blasé about it, didn't I? You know, somebody said to me once, "Oh, you'll get used to dealing with sudden death." But I said, I don't want to. When I'm dealing with dead people, I want to be upset, because at least that way I maintain my humanity. You know?
Yeah, beautiful. Albert, I've lost track of time, but that's, you know, expected. But that's not the problem here. I'd like to try and wrap this up with a summary of solutions to this. Well, I'll say unlawful actions of the government. I'll not say an unlawful government as of yet, but definitely at least.
It is perfectly unlawful government, because Parliament's not legally comprised. But you know, what it needs is all of the individual groups, the BNP, the National Front, everybody, to forget all about that and just think of themselves as being English, right, or British. Just think of yourselves as being British, and you are not the BNP, you are not EDL, you are not National Front. What you are is you are a regiment in the Army of Britain, and we need all these regiments to work together. And until they start working together, all of these regiments are just smashing their heads against the wall. If we can get them all working together, then we can get people to do things. You know, if your member of Parliament, for example, and is a government minister, and you call a massive march at his home, for example, and you turn out all of these regiments of Britain all at his house, then he has to listen. He has to listen, because he knows damn well that you know where he lives, and that you could come down there as his regiment, and you're going to walk over his security, which is only going to be one, maybe two policemen, you know, maybe a dozen policemen, but you're going to walk over them because there's so many of you, they can't fire fast enough. And you're going to drag him out and hang him up off a lamppost. He knows that, so he's going to have to start listening. And you tell him that. If you don't listen, we're telling you what you're going to do, and if you don't listen, we are coming back for you, and we are going to hang you off a lamppost. After all, these Muslims go rushing around the country, don't they, shouting "kill the infidel" and all the rest of it, and nobody arrests them for threats to kill, do they? You know, so let's start putting some pressure on where it matters. You know, you waste your time. You go to Westminster, you waste your time. Go and find out where the bugger lives. Go and find out where David Cameron lives in Whitney, and go and visit his house. All of the groups together, all of you together, visit his house and tell him that if he wants to live to old age, he's going to have to start doing the right thing. And the right thing, as far as we're concerned, is he should jack the job in now and never go near Parliament again, because the man is an idiot of the first ilk. You know.
Well, I don't think solution now. Surely, Peter. Surely it should have sunk in. I mean, I'm of the age that I've probably been through 9, 10 so-called general elections. And it's time now to say, well, this can't be resolved by the ballot box, surely.
No, unless everybody in the country is going to vote UKIP next time round, then no, it won't be. You know, if UKIP get in with 20 members of Parliament, it still won't be resolved, because they're not enough to do anything. But if they get in with a landslide, if they completely wipe out the major parties, then UKIP would then be in a position to change an awful lot of stuff. And there's an awful lot of good people in UKIP. But it's not going to... I don't see that happening. I don't see government... I don't see the Metropolitan Police, certainly under its current leadership, going out and arresting government ministers, past and present, and charging them with treason. I don't see that happening. As I said earlier, my honest opinion now is that this needs... people to be armed. It needs to be sorted out at the point of a gun.
Well, I'm 28, Albert. I should really fall under that category, but I've tried everything in my power to try and find a way around this where it's not always leading to violence and things.
The way that I look at it is, by
And I
inclination.
will say I'm struggling.
Yeah. Well, the way I look at it is this: by inclination and training, I'm a policeman. So violence is something that I don't agree with, right? Um, but nevertheless, as I have pointed out to Cameron and others, I reserve the right at the end of the day to take my country back, if necessary, by force and at the point of a gun. Because at the moment, everybody in Parliament is determined to give it away to Europe. They're determined to give it away by importing so many Muslims in here and their 4 wives, you know, and that they are producing 20-odd kids per husband.
Well, I don't have a problem with the Muslims. I've got a problem with the policy that's allowing
Well,
this to happen.
well, I have a problem with the Muslims because their religion is so absolutely anti everything that we believe in as a Christian nation. You know,
That's mixing religion and politics, and I don't like to do that.
well, no, you might not like to do that, but the fact of the matter is, if you don't do that, then the Muslims, this is going to be an Islamic country in less than 40 years. Because the way they are breeding, then in fact they are going to be taking us over purely and simply by numbers. And
Well,
once,
some would say, Albert, by then it may as well be. Because
well,
if we don't do something now, it doesn't matter what comes afterwards. We've got no option but to accept what comes, yeah?
well, that is true. But I mean, I certainly don't want my granddaughters being bloody circumcised, and I certainly don't want my daughters being raped or forced to wear the burqa. I don't want it. And if necessary, I think we've been to war for less good reasons in the past. I think we should go to war again to preserve our identity, because that's what we're in danger of losing. Our identity as English people, and I do see a real threat from Islam. You know, I really do see a real threat from Islam, and why the Metropolitan Police and government are kowtowing and giving in to Islam all the time, I don't agree. I mean, I think we should bulldoze every mosque in the country. Now, people are going to say, "Oh, it's Islamophobic, it's racist." It's neither of those things. It's preserving what I believe in, and you sometimes have to do things which are unfortunate. You know. You sometimes have to do things which are bad. For example, if you're a soldier and your friend gets blown up, but he's still alive, then in fact you have to decide, can I do something for him? And if you can't, you decide what is the best thing for him. And sometimes the best thing for him is a bullet in the head. And you have to be prepared to do that. But you do that with, you know, if you like, with compassion and everything else. But I don't see any compassion in Islam. I haven't seen any compassion in Islam. And look at what's happening now on the continent. They're taking them in by the hundreds of thousands into Germany. What are they doing? They're rioting. There's a video on the internet last night of a hotel in Italy that they gave
No,
over this
but
accommodation, and they're ripping
these
off the furniture out and throwing it out the windows.
these compassion within the people of that religion, Albert. These people against ISIS and things like that. You can't.
Well, not if
Deny that.
No, I don't accept that, because if they were against, I'll tell you why they're coming out and they're saying that they don't agree that, you know, ISIS not in our name. There's a Radio Oxford the other day. I tried to get on the radio. They I think they blocked my phone. But there was a guy on there from a Muslim fella from there who works at Oxford University as a lecturer, and he was saying that he wants a million Muslim march in London in order to say to ISIS not in our name. Now, I'm very suspicious of that, because you've got a million Muslims. He wants to meet at Trafalgar Square, but you've got a million Muslims in London, and instead of going to Hyde Park, which is what they plan to do, is what he's saying they would do, and have a big rally in Hyde Park with a million Muslims, all saying not in our name to ISIS, it only takes a short walk down to Buckingham Palace. And if you've got a million unarmed Muslims charging the security won't be able to keep them out, because they certainly can't fire their guns fast enough to actually stop them. And once they're in Buckingham Palace and they've got hold of the Queen, where do we go from there once they've got the Queen and the royal family? You know, what do you do then? Well, I know what I would do then. I'd find out whichever royal was outside of the palace, who wasn't captured, and I would immediately make them regent to rule the country in the Queen's name. But I would immediately make them regent on the basis that the Queen is no longer physically capable of carrying out the job. And then I would go on about sorting out the thing. If in the process Queen Elizabeth happened to get shot and die in the crossfire, if you like, then that I would consider to be highly unfortunate, but it would be an accident, and she would have died for her country, and I think she's risked that in the past, and I think she'd probably risk it again. But I mean, basically, I don't believe there's any good Muslims. I think what's happening is that because of what ISIS are doing, Muslims are getting frightened of any kickback. And there are kickbacks. I mean, there are kickbacks. I understand in Rotherham. There's lots of kickbacks going on in Rotherham. There's the French are arming, the Germans are arming, the Italians are going to be arming themselves soon, I should think. All against government policy, but nevertheless they're doing it. And they are prepared to fire. If you look at the stuff in America, I talked to quite a few people in America. A vast number of women in America are going out and buying guns because they don't want Islam. And they don't want to be raped by Islam, and they know that Obama is importing Islam in large numbers and wants to import them in massive numbers, and so the Americans are arming themselves so that when push comes to shove, they can keep their country. And I think we need to think the same way. It's regrettable, I'm sorry, but that's what I think. And do I feel that's
I can kind of agree in certain terms that where, I mean, do you have a problem with Muslims in their own country? Now, say you went on holiday.
Well, I do have a problem with Muslims in their own country because of the way they treat their own people.
Well, but yeah, let me finish this point. How many of these refugees and terrorists are Iranian?
Well, it doesn't really matter, is it? How many of them are women and children? If you look at the ones that are marching, they are almost 100% men. They're also 100% men of military age.
Yeah, I know, but my point is that when you say all Muslims you regard the same, well, there are Sunni and Shia Muslims, and they're not exactly the same if you look at the countries that are predominantly Shia and predominantly Sunni, or should we say the ruling part of them countries are predominantly Sunni or predominantly Shia. If you look at Iran, for instance, now, I don't think there's millions or hundreds of thousands of Iranians leaving persecution of the leaders in Iran. In actual fact, if you go and look on the ground, you'll find that most of the Iranians, and they have troops on the ground in Syria, are Iranians. They're fighting against these radical al-Nusra, ISIS, whatever you want to call them.
You will get that, wouldn't you? You will get that. When they're not fighting against the rebels, they're killing one another anyway. The Arabs have been killing one another for hundreds of years. But you've got every single Middle Eastern country is sworn, every member of every single Middle Eastern country is sworn that they have got to kill everybody in Israel. They've got to get Israel back. They've got to kill every Israeli. Now, everybody over here is going mad over Palestine and calling the Israelis murderers and all the rest of it. But if you look at it logically, there are something like 6-7 million Israelis. They are surrounded by Arab countries with 1.3 billion Arabs, all Muslims, all of whom are sworn to kill every Israeli. They even tried it in the 6-Day War, didn't they? They all decided we're all going to attack together, and every country that attacked Israel trashed their army in 6 days and defeated a lot of them in 6 days. Did Israel then go out into the main Arab countries and take them over? No, they didn't. They kept Palestine because it gave them a buffer zone.
Yeah,
that's what it did.
The Israeli state isn't no angels in any of this, and I'm not going to mention Palestine.
That's why I don't get involved in titles and labels.
No, that's
right. If you look at it logically, the Jews are only another tribe of Arabs. They're just another tribe of Arabs that chose a different way of religion. But the Jews themselves have always been picked on by the other Arabs. I mean, they were enslaved by Pharaoh when Moses took them out, weren't they? You know, um, and so the Jews have been the whipping boy for the Arabs forever and a day. And at some stage, you expect the whipping boy to suddenly say, well, enough is enough is enough. Now, people go on about the fact that the Israelis go in and they blow up areas of Palestine where they might have a school there. But the fact of the matter is, why are they blowing up the school? They're blowing up the school because some bugger in Hamas has put a rocket launching site there. And they're firing rockets, 8,000 a year or something, into Israel. So can you expect the Israelis reasonably, is it reasonable to expect the Israelis to sit there and take these 8,000 rockets just because of where they're placed, the launching sites are placed, and do nothing about wiping them out?
No, that's why I believe the two-state solution can never be an answer. Actually, I do believe, which I'm probably very not immature, but I don't know what the word is for it. I believe there's a one-state solution, a one-state solution, not a two-state, where people come together. But I know that's a utopian thought that you mustn't have in your mind.
It will never work, will it? Because for thousands of years, Arabs have been killing one another. If you happen to be in one tribe of Arabs and you drink out of another tribe's water hole, then they kill you. You know, they kill you. You know how are you going to stop these people killing? They believe in killing. They are brought up to kill.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we shouldn't have anything to do with their troubles. I actually say bring the troops back, and you'll probably say it's very naive, and we look after ourselves. Everybody look after themselves. I agree
that's fine, but there's something like 24,000 African slaves still in the Middle East, and we are anti-slavery. Now, you see all the time, don't you, videos of women, for whatever reason, being put in a hole in the ground and the hole filled in to just their head and shoulders, and then groups of men stand around and throw rocks at her.
Then we can't. Yeah, but we can't be the world's police. We're not big enough. We're not powerful. We're not an empire anymore. In actual fact, the USA are losing their hegemony. So you know this.
Well, the USA are losing because of who they've got in command. If you listen to some of the people there, you know, there's a colonel, retired colonel, who said, well, what you have to do if you want to protect the world from Islam, you have to go in and kill every Muslim and then kill his donkey. You know, because as long as they are alive, they will be a problem. But can we, in all conscience, stand back and allow the rape of women in just because they're in the Middle East, the murder of women by stoning them to death? I mean, that's horrific. Just say, loads of men, dozens of men, standing around a hole in the ground with a woman buried up to her shoulders in or up to her waist, and they're all picking up bloody rocks and throwing them at her. I mean, it would be something if they just let her have a head start and they all chased her and threw the rocks while she was running. At least give the poor cow a chance, you know. But they don't. It's 100% cowardice. It's 100% against women. And I don't think that, in all honesty, we don't have a moral duty to go in and protect those women. And I think if you should, but then the women themselves are brain dead as well, aren't they? I mean, the women themselves are so brought up to this hatred that they go out and kill. And then, you know, women whose children blow themselves up, they turn around, they don't say, well, I'm really sad, my son, you know, he's done something highly stupid. They say, no, my son is a martyr for Allah, and I've got another 10 sons, and they can all go and blow themselves up, and I'll be really happy over that. I mean, how many mothers do you know in the West that would do that?
There are different. I'm not making an excuse for any of that, and I totally agree with you. And I condemn any actions like that totally, because I am a human being and I'm empathetic, and I think everybody should be allowed to get on peacefully and live the life that they, you know, are born to live. I mean, not any of this one world government hegemony. You do as I say, otherwise you die type rules. I've never really felt like that, but to sort the problems out we have now. I mean, we can't even sort our own problems out in our own country. We've got despotic governments, tyrannical governments, who say that they're above the law, they're sovereign, you can't touch them, they can do anything that
Well,
they want.
I agree with you 100%. Before we can sort anything else out, we have to sort ourselves out.
Yes,
And as I've said a couple of times tonight, my honest opinion is that will be done at the point of a gun. I can't see any other way of doing it. Oh, be quiet. I can't see any other way of doing it.
that saddens me an awful lot, Albert.
Well, it saddens me too, but nevertheless, one has to be realistic about these things.
What saddens me more is that that your dog actually agrees with you, Albert.
I've got 3 of them.
But anyway, just on a closing note, because I should imagine you've got tremendous staying power, Albert. I agree with that and everything else. Extensive knowledge in the law, which I don't even know 1% of what you've got and what you know. Basically, if we just sit here and we just write letters, how can people protest more effectively while staying inside the law?
Well, you can stay inside. You stay inside the law, and you protest effectively by everybody deciding that they are not, you know, BNP or EDL or whatever. That they are English people with a genuine grievance, and you forget all your titles and you forget all your banners, and you just protest as English people with a grievance.
And Albert, we're not going home tonight.
No, and I'm suggesting now that because of what's happening, certainly with Islam, that we actually should also start to buy equipment to actually defend ourselves. Now, what I'm saying is that in the event of a major riot, say this Muslim march comes off, in the event of something like that going silly, the police are going to be overwhelmed. So what I'm suggesting to people is that you go on the internet, you buy yourself a set of flame-proof overalls, an ex-police riot helmet, and a long shield, and some boots and stuff. And then you can form up, and if we've got enough ex-servicemen in these various groups around who've done riot training, they can then train the members of the group in riot training. So you can actually act as a mobile reserve to the police, so that if the police are being pushed back, then the people themselves can go out and join the police and say, look, here we are, we're equipped, we're ready to go, and we're going to help you. Now, you can't obviously have a truncheon, can you? It's illegal for you to have a truncheon. On the other hand, you can have a hardwood walking stick, because we all need help walking, don't we? So you have yourself a hardwood walking stick with an 1.5 inch barrel on it, or 1.25 inch barrel, but made out of ebony or ash or oak or something like that, with a T-cross handle on it.
You can have a good bat, Albert, if you've got a bow with it.
Yeah. So with a T-cross handle, because the T-cross handle, if you're really push comes to shove, then you can hit them on the head with a T-thrust, and it'll be just like hitting somebody with a hammer. So basically, you're there. You've got your riot shield. You've got your boots, your gloves, and all the business. Costs you less than £100 to keep yourself out, but you can then form and train as an auxiliary to the police, to back up the police. And I think we need that, because I think when push comes to shove, we don't have enough police in this country to deal with major Muslim riots. I don't think. And what really sickens me is when I look at the internet and I see English police officers running away from Muslims. I can never do that. You know, rather than run away, I'd commandeer a bloody bus and run them over. But you cannot.
It's not always the massive numbers that cause a problem, Albert. I mean, just look at David Cameron and his cronies. I mean, that's a small number. Look at the chaos they cause.
I know, but it's
to me, I'm more bothered by that than Muslims.
Yeah, but it's yes, you're quite right. I mean, David Cameron and Parliament are our major problem. However, there is a very big secondary problem that we have, which Parliament are responsible for saddling us with, because all these things are done by Parliament. They allow people come in, and you know who gets thrown out and that. You know, we have people that have committed rapes and everything else, and who should be thrown out, and Parliament won't allow you because it affects their human rights. It's not their human rights. They lost all their right to human rights when they started raping our women. You know,
Yeah.
I mean,
I'll tell you why they're more of a concern than Muslim to me. It's because I can reason with a Muslim. I can't reason with David Cameron.
well, you see, you say you can reason with a Muslim. You
I
can
can.
reason. You can reason with a Muslim on a one-to-one basis. But how could you reason with 50 of them out for blood? I
Well,
don't think you
what's the
can.
difference from David Cameron on his own and having 50,000 Muslims?
Well,
I reckon I'd have more of a chance reasoning with 50,000 Muslims than I would with David Cameron on his own.
I think you'd end up like the American ambassador, dead.
I probably would, but
You
on the
know,
other hand,
and
I'm still going to end up.
at least Cameron's not going to kill you. You know, I mean, largely because he hasn't got the skill. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that
But that don't mean I'm not going to end up dead.
no,
Because he's
no,
not the one to kill me.
no. But the fact is, we do need to sort out our government. We are not going to do that operating as individuals or as small groups. You know, if everybody, let's say my group, the English Constitution group, if I've got 250 members, probably 20 of them are effective, right? If those 20 people can get 17 police forces to accept 5 allegations of treason between them, how many more allegations of treason would we get if instead of having 250, I had 2,500 or 250,000 or 2.5 million, all writing to the local chief constable demanding that government ministers be arrested for treason? How much more of that chance have we got of the police actually getting off their backsides and saying, you know, this is it? Now, government have just backed down over the police, haven't they? Because government were going to demand police cutbacks, and the police have said we can't operate our system under this, and if necessary, we will have to take whatever action we feel is necessary to protect the public. That means arresting government ministers, because that's the only way the police can do it, to bring a case against government ministers and send them all to jail for a long time. So government then back down because there's a real threat from the police that they are going to be high and dry. Supposing every police officer on government protection duty, every police officer assigned to a government minister turned around and said, I want to go back to directing traffic. I don't want this job anymore. I'm going back to directing traffic. Well, sooner or later, every government minister didn't have a policeman to himself. Another police officer said, I don't want that job. They can't replace them. What's going to happen then? What's going to happen then when the police have got no protection from the public, when the government have got no police protection from the public? When you can just walk up to David Cameron's house and kick it in and go and give him a thumping, you know, because there's nobody there to stop you with a gun. What's going to happen then? So government are giving way to the police because they can see these risks coming. Government are worried. That's why they're doing the things they're doing, to try and remove our rights and freedoms. You know, in their this new Bill of Rights they want, I've got the book, a report of theirs.
Well, if they're worried, Albert, why don't they just leave?
Well, because they're not leaving because they want the money. They want the money. You see, the more they do that benefits their friends in big business, and let's be fair, they are selling off the national silver to the big business that they are friendly with. Yeah. The more of that they do, the more chance of when they leave government or are forced out of government that they're going to get good, well-paid jobs in those businesses.
Well, that's why I said, Albert, put them on minimum wage and strip them from any ability to be doing anything as regard of money.
If you were in the House of Parliament, that should be your only job. That should be your only job, and your only friend should be your constituent.
Totally agree. Yeah.
It's not even a part-time job for them. You go and check the hours. They only stay half a year.
Well, let me tell you, right? I do a lot of research, and one of the things that I found in my research is that Parliament can consist of 40 members of Parliament. If there's only 40 there, that represents a Parliament. But if there are less than 40 there, it doesn't represent the Parliament. So any decisions that are made are not legal because it's not a representative of Parliament. But if there are only 40 there, and there comes up something for discussion which is of national importance, those 40 are not allowed to discuss it. Those 40 have to send writs to every other member of Parliament to get them to come to Westminster to take part in that debate. Now, if you look at, I've given up looking, but if you look at Parliament today on the television, how many members of Parliament do you get there when you've got something on a debate on like heating allowances for the elderly?
Hardly any.
Half, you know, or maybe school places for special needs. How many? You've got less than 40, haven't you? You've probably got 3 either side, yeah? And somebody out bringing the tea in. So they're not even a parliament, yet they're making decisions which affect hundreds and thousands of people. So we should reinstate the rules the way they are. You know, we should reinstate the rules the way we are. Give the Queen back.
Al, but there was a debate the other year which I actually done a recording of it and put it on social media, and it was the topic. It was called money creation in society. The most important debate, you would think, about how the banks create this fiat currency, right? There was 20 people.
Yeah, but then you see they know how the banks are created because they're all getting backhanders off them, aren't they?
Yeah, and do you know what the speaker announced it as? A cruel debate.
A quorum debate.
No, cruel, as in cruel.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, a cruel debate. What the hell does that mean?
I've no idea. But you see that the only decent speaker the House of Commons has had is Betty Boothroyd for a long time. You know, but I mean, basically, as you know, as far as I'm concerned, I mean, the whole lot needs to be sorted out. We need to gut the place, get everybody out. Everybody who's and I'll go further. Everybody in public office, in government, central government, or in your local authority should be banned. I'm talking about the councillors and that. Should be banned from ever holding public office. Every one of them.
I agree.
Should be banned from ever holding public office. And I think that what we can do on a local basis, if you want to go out and organise it, if you organise your local area and you select yourselves somebody that you want to run for the council, when the elections come up, you put them forward, and everybody, by a pre-decision, votes them in. And if that happened, then everybody who's currently sat there will be out, and you've got the council of your choice, not somebody that got politically put in by the Labour Party or the Conservative Party.
Well, perhaps we should form grand juries as well. How about that?
Well, grand juries are a good idea, but they're also not legal, are they? And this is the point.
Well, because it bypasses CPS.
Well, you can make the CPS do the right thing. I mean, I've done that, but you have to know what you're doing, and you have to put everybody personally responsible for their own actions. And this is the point. I had a drink driver one night, and I nicked him and got him back down to nick. He was currently serving a 5-year and a 10-year ban for drink drive. He was also wanted on a warrant for failing to appear on another drink drive, and he blew 135 for me. So you can be surprised when I got a billy do 2 weeks later from the process section telling me it wasn't going to court. So I phoned them up and said, why? And they said, nothing to do with us, Albert, it's the CPS, they've not taken it to court. So I phoned the CPS up and I said, I wonder if you can talk to me about this, why is this not going to court? And they said, it's got nothing to do with you. I said, I'm the arresting officer, it's got absolutely everything to do with me. And I'm asking you ever so nicely if you could explain to me why this is not going to court. For example, if it's anything to do with my paperwork, then I need to find that out so I don't make the same mistake again. And they said, we refuse to tell you. So I said to them, well, I'm asking you ever so nicely, would you please tell me? And she said, no, we refuse to tell you. I said, no, I have a system with my children I ask them nicely to do something. If they don't do it, I tell them to do it. If they still don't do it, I count to 3. If I get to 3, they get smacked arse and sent to bed. I said, now I've already asked you ever so nicely to tell me. I'm shortly going to tell you to tell me. If I get to 3, I'm coming down to your office and I'm going to find out which of your solicitors made that decision, and I'm going to arrest them for perverting the course of justice. They said, you can't do that. We're a Crown Prosecution Service. I said, you're not above the law. They said, well, none of our other solicitors will process it. I said, well, in which case I shall find out who's not processing it and I shall arrest them for perverting the course of justice. And I will go on arresting you till my cells are full up with everybody in there. I said, now once I've done that, I won't have a Crown Prosecution Service to prosecute you, so I'll have to do it myself. And because I'm very good at the job I do, you're all going to be found guilty. That means you're all going to prison. And when you come out of prison, you're all going to find that you've been struck off the solicitors list. Tell me now. They said, but you can't. I said, 1. They said, but we're the Crown Prosecution Service. I said, 2. They said, hold on a minute. And then they came back and they said, we've reconsidered and we're putting him into Hendon Magistrates Court, and the guy was sent to prison. So you can make people do things by making them personally responsible for their own actions. And that is the principle that I've worked on all along. We make everybody personally responsible for their own actions. You report treason to a police officer, he refuses to deal with it, you then report that policeman for the criminal offence of misprision of treason.
Right.
And you make everybody responsible for their own actions. And we have to do that. And we have
responsibility, that's where it's at now.
And we have to do it in a sensible and a reasonable manner. If we do it sensibly and reasonably, forget all the hysteria and all the rest of it, we do it in a sensible and reasonable manner, then we get what we want at the end of the day. But regrettably, as I say, we've not succeeded in getting thousands and thousands of people reporting treason, and we've not succeeded in getting thousands and thousands of people to agree to work with other groups, because, you know, the other group is, you know, we don't like them because. I've talked at BNP meetings. Do you know what I found with the BNP? I talked to them and they all tell me the same thing. I used to be a lifelong Tory, but I can't get what I want out of my Tory party. I used to be lifelong Labour, but the Labour Party's gone silly. So I looked at the websites and I found that the BNP have got the better website. I looked at UKIP first, but I looked at the BNP website and thought they had a better website. So the BNP is actually the Labour and Conservative parties. That's what they are, because that's what their membership is. Labour and Conservative. Gone are the days of the bully boy and the bother boots. These are now all middle class people or working class people who've looked around for something which reflects their opinions, and they find that it's in UKIP, but they prefer the website for the BNP. So there should not be any stigma to being in the BNP or the EDL. I've talked to EDL rallies. I've talked at their rallies. They were as good as gold, the EDL. I'll tell you who were the pain in the arse. The UAF were a pain in the arse. They were the ones throwing the barriers at the police and shouting and screaming and ranting and raving. You know, so what we need to do is we need to get all of the sensible people in this country fighting for England, and all fighting and all singing off the same hymn sheet. Because until we do that, the only way this is going to be solved is by 300 or 400 people with guns. I'll tell you that for nothing.
Okay. Well, I think you've given people who listen to this a few ideas on with the Constitution, the rule of law, effective protesting, if that's what you want to call it. So yeah, I'll put it over to PJ and say thanks for coming on, Albert.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Albert.
Yeah, well, I have to go anyway because I've got to drive to London now and collect my wife.
No, we'll have to see how it goes, but hopefully, if people do listen to this, then
okay,
we should get the outcome we all need, and not the outcome we're all going to get through his actions of being idle. But Albert, thank you very much, and
that's all right.
Take care and look after yourself.
Right, bye.
Likewise. All right, bye.